All right.
Oh, sorry.
It's all good.
A little echo.
Yeah, we got a little echo.
Hello, hello, hello. Alan, where are you?
Hello, everyone. This right here, this is Jerry Rees. He is a legend. He is a director, a writer, filmmaker, architect, engineer, Imagineer, father. I can throw in so many titles just because I think you do everything. I don't even know how to explain it. I kind of want to just pass the baton to you and let you do your own introduction, please, if you can.
The wearer of many hats. Remember Jill Lehman, a scientist, came into my room in 2017. We were collaborating on a project at Imagineering Research and Development. And she came in, she's a brilliant computer scientist, and she came and sat down in my room and she goes, okay, I have no idea what you do, but I understand you're very good at it. And that kind of summed everything up. And I think over the years, as you say, I've worn so many hats that some people say, what are you? And I think storyteller, which people eventually sort of as a label they stuck on me, is probably the most appropriate, that all those things kind of fit under it. But I thought I would just quickly go through like a 5-minute skip through a bunch of years and wearing of different hats and things, and so you could get a flavor, and then we can launch into your interview as you wish.
Yes, please, because no matter how many times I Google you, I don't think anything's going to do better than your own
and
introduction.
By the way, a lot of stuff online really needs to be updated. Like the most out of date is IMDb, and even my website. I list 16 theme park attractions that I've been a director on for Disney. It's 22. So I need to redo even my own website to catch up. But let's start with me at, I actually started with Disney younger than this, but this is the youngest picture I had.
Gotcha.
Just as I was going into CalArts. During high school, when I was 16, 17 years old, Eric Larson, who was one of Walt Disney's famous 9 old men, the animators that were with him all the way since Snow White, wound up being my mentor. So during high school, I would go study with Eric anytime I had a summer break, any sort of break from school, and then became teacher's assistant for the famous A113 premier year of California Institute of the Art character animation program. So this is that famous picture. I think Harry Sabin put his camera on a timer and took a picture of this group, but this is the A113 guinea pig year at CalArts. John Lasseter and Brad Bird and John Musker, Doug Leffler, a bunch of people are there. And there's me in looking all too coy in my embroidered shirt. Years later, there was Annie Leibovitz photographed us in that same classroom. So this was, there I am sitting up on the desk between Brad and John. And it was a Vanity Fair article called The Class That Roared, and paying tribute to so much creativity that came out of that classroom, which was a rather boring cinder block classroom at CalArts, but a lot of creativity. My Annie Leibovitz selfie after that session, she was an extraordinary photographer. I have hardbound books of hers on my library shelf. I never thought I would be on the front end of her camera. After 2 years, 4 of us were pulled out of CalArts and became Disney feature animators. So there I am, and I was working on Pete's Dragon at the End Crunch, the small one, The Fox and the Hound. And they took a group photo, and recently Don Hahn reached out to me and asked me for my copy of this photo because he couldn't find it in the Disney archives. It was a group shot that was taken right around the time that we were working on The Fox and the Hound. And it had 4 of the 9 old men in the picture. And
Oh, there you are. Yeah.
And so Glenn Keane and I in that picture as youngsters.
Wow.
And so Don Hahn had seen it on my website, and I had a full figure, glossy, still in the original envelope that it came in at the studio, and so I did a high-res scan and cleaned it up.
Oh, wow.
Hanging out with Tim Burton and Randy Cartwright. We did a couple of home movies together that we just made them for laughs, but years later, Tim had a show at MoCA, and they had one of our 2 films on a loop at that show. Here's a light painting I did of Tim back at the time. We used to do experiments completely on our own time. This is me and my fellow rats of the Rat's Nest. Dan Haskett should be in this picture. I believe he was taking the picture, but he was a fellow rat and brilliant artist. But you have Henry Selick, Bill Croyer, myself, Brad Bird, John Musker. Years later, we tried to replicate that photo. To do the little A-B back and forth there, we tried to be true to it. And that was the morning after, Tina, after we appeared at the Rat's Nest reunion at CTN.
And it was
Expo.
Don Bluth that called you the Rats, right?
So yes, Don Bluth stormed into the room and called us a bunch of rats, that this was a rat's nest. And so we wore the label proudly, and Andy Gaskill, who's a brilliant artist, did a painting for our door that said the Rat's Nest with explosions that looked like an action movie. I jumped up onto Tron. I was the only animator that did that. So Bill Croyer and I were the two computer image choreographers for Tron. So
Big breakthrough.
So classically trained in Disney feature animation, spent part of my career doing that, then jumped into early adopting of computers. Yes. Well, and by the way, to give messages, to go to Lisberger and show him shots, what we had to do is we had a phone modem that was bringing up, it's take a long time to do a vector image on that screen. And then we'd take a Polaroid of that and messenger it to his office. So him looking at a Polaroid of this shot that came through a phone modem, that was how we showed computer images to each other. And Smithsonian came and took some shots of us working.
Nice.
So, and John Lasseter used to come peek at what we were doing and thought all the computer stuff looked very interesting. So that was his sort of entree into beginning to work there. This is me and Brad Bird. We spent 5 years trying to get Will Eisner's The Spirit off the ground with Gary Kurtz producing. We moved up north for that, and Rebecca took some shots of us. For some reason, we were feeling quite lightheaded that day. And then that, after 5 years, and that did not happen, although we really tried to make it happen. The animation industry wasn't ready for a film noir, big Gary Kurtz produced animated feature at the time. They were still looking for the next Princess movie or Elves in the Woods movie, so it didn't happen. But then the opportunity came along for me to develop, write, and direct The Brave Little Toaster. Tom Wilhite, who had been my executive on Tron, invited me onto it and gave me that responsibility. So here I am working with John Lovitz, the radio character in The Brave Little Toaster. During The Brave Little Toaster, I gave a hello back to my classmates in room A113.
And that's the
And
first
all of us
time
tried to
it
do
was
that.
showed, yeah.
That was, I think, the first time that it showed up. Rob Minkoff was at a reunion, and he was looking back through, and he said, "You know what? I think that was the first time." Jumped into then working in the theme parks. Had the joy of directing Robin Williams in his first foray into animation. So part of the time I was filming in live action, and then we turned him into an animated character. And right after that, and by the way, part of our show that we had in our short, which was meant to play at the Disney MGM studio tour in the animation building, Robin improvised, and we did metamorphosis animation with him. And so that rang a bell for the Aladdin team, where they're like, hey, Robin improvising, morphing, could be the genie. So they invited us to the premiere. So they cast Robin as the genie, did the film. And at the end they said, oh, there's a tip of the hat to the short, because, you know, it's like it wouldn't have been this movie without Robin Williams and the short pioneering the way. So we put a permanent tip of the hat to your short in our feature. And so I went to the premiere, and I completely forgot about it after 10 minutes. I was just caught up in their story. But at the end, when the genie gets his freedom and he comes zipping back to talk to them, he's dressed very much like he was in my film on the left side, where he showed up as a tourist in the crowd for Walter Cronkite to talk to. And also just noting that Roy Disney was very involved with that whole project. The first time that Robin jumped into animation, Roy came in and was very interested and wanted to talk through everything.
Oh, wow.
And 22 Disney theme park attractions later, just some of them, Rock and Roller Coaster with Aerosmith, Dana Carvey and Kevin Nealon from Cranium Command, the right and left ventricles of the heart.
So
I
great.
still have Dana's suit, which I wear on occasion, the muscle suit. And I loaned it to Daryl Rooney to wear too, so they were passing it around. And I almost wore it at the Annie Leibovitz. I took it to the Annie Leibovitz shoot because she told us to be ready to be kind of crazy. But she went ahead and finished the shoot, and at the end of the day, I was walking out, and she was just tired. She had traveled from New York that morning and had her plane catch on fire and had to go to a different plane, and it was a whole long day for her. But I saw her just finally alone and exhaling at the end of our shoot, and as I was walking out, I had the muscle suit over my shoulder, and she's like, "Hey, we didn't get to shoot the muscle suit." I said, "Next time, Andy." So that suit's been around.
Right.
Here I am with George Lucas and Anthony Daniels. Yes, Anthony Daniels is inside the costume. No doubles.
Amazing.
He flew in from London, and he wanted to meet. I got this whole thing is kind of typical of how things worked, where some things were planned, some things were very short notice. I was filming this with George Lucas 5 days after even hearing about it being a possibility. Katzenberg sent me VHS tape, said, "We effing hate this. We shot a thing with George Lucas. Tell me what's wrong with it. Call me back." So I called him back and said, "Well, I think this is what's wrong. I think this is what I do." He goes, "Right, great. Write it tomorrow on Thursday. Go shoot it on Friday. Bye." Boom. So I wrote it, and I went up and shot it with George. And what I added was Anthony Daniels into the picture and changed the story and upped the entertainment. And so they flew Anthony Daniels in last minute as well. And I get a message that he wants to meet me at the hotel at like 1 o'clock in the morning. And I'm like, oh, geez. So I went there, and he was reading through my script, which I had just thrown together.
Oh my God.
And he's like, I was wondering if you could say here, maybe something more like, and then he would do a line. And I was like, oh, that's perfect. It's like, oh, I can change it. It's like, yes, you're the character. I said, I just wrote something to kind of be like you, but you're you. So he's like, oh, very good. What about on page 7? What's this? It's like, yeah, oh, good. So then he was very happy. And then he got into that costume, and all day long he's like in there and doing exactly the right gesture at the time. And it really reminded me his tremendous contribution, even though he's under all of that, all these little choices of body language, twitches and stuff would make it come alive. And you put somebody else in it, it's like, no, that's just kind of general movement. It's like he's making it alive. And performing the dialogue from inside.
Right.
Suit. It's just amazing. And and then unrelated, but years later, I got to direct Darth Vader. But George Lucas gave me permission
Who else
to
gets
use
to say that?
with George's permission, and Julie Delpy as a stormtrooper. So, and she loved being a stormtrooper. So that was also in Cinemagique, which is where Darth was.
Right.
And Martin Short joined her in.
Wow.
They went through 60 movies. Star Wars was one of them.
Mm-hmm.
So that was an absolute joy. This is one of the earlier films she was in. She was started out as a silent movie actress, and then went through many different films, including Star Wars. Martin Short as a chimney sweep in Mary Poppins. So that was one of the things he went through. And he was a trooper. He worked deep underwater for me, too. And that was a sequence where I had him meet Pinocchio underwater in the animation, and then Monstro the whale chased him. And Roy Disney had said no to permission to use the footage because the legal department had sent him a description that I wanted to mess with the Pinocchio scenes. Like, no, nobody's going to mess with this classic feature. So I went to meet him, and I told the team, I said, I got to talk to Roy about this. I think he would love it. And they're like, well, we'll go, we'll have a meeting. So everything was very formal. And everybody was in line. I was like the last person in line, and the door opens, and Roy looks over everybody's head and goes, "Jerry, hi!" And they all the heads turn on, and they're like, "Oh yeah, we know each other." So he's like, "Come on in." So then I went to the head of the line. I went in, and sat down and went through the storyboard book and said, "Here's what it would be." And he's just, "Oh, that's charming. You can do that." He goes, "I read in the legal brief of like we have permission to change," and he says, "But that's sweet, great." So we wound up with him having to swim deep underwater to get blue screen to join him with Pinocchio in a scene.
Amazing.
And he was great. He actually asked me, because I went and met with him before we did that segment, and I said, well, I'm trying to take you out of the water between every shot so you don't feel too overwhelmed by the day. And he said, no, I'd rather stay under as long as possible each time you take me down. And I said, really? And he said, oh, yeah, because I'm afraid of getting cold when I get out. So I went, oh, okay. So I rearranged the storyboards and went, well, we could get these 3 shots. They're similar. So while you're down, then you can come up, and then I can get these 4 shots while you're down. He's like, okay, that's good. So I went to the divers and explained it to them. And so we wound up getting a lot of footage. And boy, did he trust his diver, because he had to go way down and have the regulator to breathe out of. And then I would talk to him in an underwater phone thing. And when we were ready, He'd nod yes, and then he would take the regulator, hand it to his diver companion. Then he had to wipe all the bubbles off his face because you can't have that. And then perform the scene, and I would feed lines to him underwater with the special microphone. And then he would finish the thing, and then I would call cut, and then he would have to wait for his diver to hand him the regulator back because he didn't have time.
That's so special.
He didn't have time to swim to the top. He had to trust that I will get that.
Right.
And he absolutely nailed it. And it was funny because that day, it was a long day that was planned and a lot of complexity. And it was kind of funny because we wrapped early, and that there were like several Disney execs at the craft services table, and they're watching us starting to move equipment in the afternoon. They're like, "What are you guys doing?" And they're like, "Well, we're going home." They're like, "What?" "Yeah, we got the day." And we did. So, but anyway, it was so fun working with him. And Julie,
Wow.
and they were great together. And by the way, when he was working with Julie, he did things like there was a day where he was off the clock. We had finished with him, and I still had a couple close-ups to get of Julie Delpy, and I just went and met him at the car, and I said, I'm doing a shot where in the film, she's laughing at your antics, and nobody, truly on this set, you make her smile and laugh more than anybody. Would you be okay if you come back and feed lines? He said, "Oh, absolutely." And he was off the clock, but he came back and he got in her eye line and would do all kinds of fun stuff for her to watch, and it made her laugh.
That's great. That's great.
Just sweet. And then I got to work with Steve Martin, and Martin Short. Dick Cook had gotten in touch with his office had gotten in touch with me and said, "We're trying to hire Steve for this thing for you to direct, and is it okay if we use your name and tell Steve that you're directing?" And I said, "Well, yeah, but I don't see why that would have much value with Steve Martin." And they said, "Well, he's best friends with Martin Short, and you've directed him, and so he can just call Marty and go,
Wow.
alike." So I said, "Oh, by all means." So he did, and we wound up having a great time together. That's a whole story. But one of the fun things I got to do with him is tell the true story of how he started working at the park in front of the magic shop. And he worked in the magic shop. I filmed him in front of the magic shop. But there was no way that I could film this in the park, so I actually got to build part of Main Street
That's so cool.
at Raleigh Studios.
Right.
So the pavement, the lamps, the
Wow.
magic shop, adjoining stores and everything. So I think, as far as I know, I'm the only person who has taken part of Disneyland out of Disneyland and fooled people where they watched it and absolutely thought they were there.
Right.
So,
Wow. Yeah. I don't think anyone's ever done that. No.
So that was fun.
For anything. Right.
Yeah. Oh, and we had all kinds of crowds of people to come through. Yeah.
That's wonderful.
And very different to work with. Like, Martin Short would show up just fully animated all the time and just entertaining everybody that he would run into. Steve Martin showed up very thoughtful and quiet and contemplative, and then he would very quietly talk to me. "Do you think it would be funny if I did this one time or two times?" And I go, "Well, I think maybe two." "All right." So then I go call action, and then he would just turn on like a light bulb, and it would just sparkle. And I was amazed to see these two very different ways of working.
Wow.
And Eugene Levy, when he was, I directed him. That was the quickest turnaround I've ever done, where they called me and said I had worked with Billy D. Williams doing his comeback appearance in Star Tours and in a new chapter. So, and they really liked the way I worked with him, where I didn't go back to, they call it Video Village. I just had the instinct that it would be better to talk directly to him close, so I took an Apple box, they call it, on the set, and put it like 8 feet from him, so we could just quietly talk between every take. And they said, "Oh, it'd be great if you do that with Eugene," and because this whole thing is about somebody telling a story and having this intimate rapport with an audience. And when you did that, it really helped awaken this sort of casual intimacy. So can you do that with him again? So said, "Okay, when is it happening?" "Well, tomorrow. It's happening on Saturday, and we're going to do it over at the Imagineering in one of the rooms." So I went to meet him there, and we recorded on Saturday, and I asked him if I could sit in the booth with him and be the one person he told the story to. And he's like, "Well, that's kind of fun." And so I just got into the booth with him, and at the end he said, that really worked. It made me much more friendly, and I wasn't projecting to a crowd. I'm talking to one guy. So we sent all the tracks that night. They did a quick edit Sunday, and it was in front of the public on Monday. So they opened the Canada Far and Wide, and that's the quickest turnaround I've ever done for actual production footage. Alien Encounter, whole story, which I won't go into at the moment, but had a great time working with them.
All right, you have some fan mail to ask specifically about this, actually.
Well, that was a wild and fun adventure. And also another sort of bull that I rode was being an animation producer for Space Jam. And there's with
So
Mr.
cool.
DeVito there, Swackhammer. I directed Alec Baldwin in his young days, and there you see him with Paul Reiser and Fisher Stevens. And Kim Basinger.
Right
And-
before they both got nominated.
Yeah, and LA Confidential. I think, truth be told, her performance is deeper in our film. I wish she had gotten it, but that's the whole story into itself. But the director's cut plus her performance, I think, would have been more Oscar worthy
Right.
than what she actually won for. But I'm glad she finally won because she's very deserving. And directed Robots, so I like that getting close up and personal with my performers, whether they're flesh and blood or robotic and AI. Quadrupeds as well. I've directed Medusa. In fact, I did the artwork for Medusa in the Mystic Manor, as well as directing her. Directed a raccoon, although wait, you can't call him that or he'll get insulted, Rocket. Guardians of the Galaxy and Benicio del Toro, Chris Pratt. Went and met with them in Atlanta. So James Gunn and the whole team would, so I showed up with my handy book of storyboards and would go through, here's the shot, here's what we're doing. And then we would set about doing it. And I was sort of shocked in a good way that they all showed up absolutely in costume as themselves. So Drax and Gamora, like everybody is completely, and the Star-Lord. Just, I expected them to show up just as themselves,
Right.
and then they would go get into costume, and it's like Drax walks in the room, and he's like, "Oh my God, they don't do any CG for this. That's just you." So we had a lot of fun prepping all the shots for that, and then got to come back and install it. And this was a concept piece. I was very happy that I got to introduce the whole story beat of them hanging in the sort of vitrine chandelier in the tower, turn the architecture into storytelling. So that's something I got to introduce with a set of story reels that I got permission from Joe Rohde and from Steve Spiegel, the creative director and writer. I was media director, but I just said, can I jump into story? They were going to go on a trip, and I said I'd love to take a pass, and they both said, sure, go for it. So I did a story reel with rough, quick sketches and introduced this concept of them being hanging in the chandelier. And I did all the voices except for Gamora, and my wife Rebecca did the voices for Gamora.
Oh.
And so Joe Rohde came back from his trip, says, what do you got? And it was like early, I think it was like 7 in the morning. Showed up, prompt, let's go. So I hit play, and he laughed and went, architecture tells story now, it's fun, let's do this. So, so they adopted my pass of the story, and we had fun with that. And I was at Chapman University a few days ago, and one of the students there said that she and her father waited 5 hours in line for the opening day of that attraction
Wow.
to take a ride on it. And I wrote it like a dozen times every night when we were from midnight to 2 a.m.
Right.
When we were installing the show. But anyway, she and her dad were very devoted to it, and had written it a number of times too.
Wow.
I directed the animation magic show that's on the cruise ship, on a couple of the biggest ships, and I did my little hello to the classmates, because in every show, Mickey holds up the drawing to go
Yes.
to represent what you've drawn.
I have
But
very
he holds
fond
up one.
memories of this as a kid.
So
Yes.
they and the team, they were very sweet. They knew that I kept doing this, and they said, "Oh, you got to put your A113 thing in Mickey's thing every time he holds it up to do the little A113."
Cute.
So I did the little representative drawing, and I put my stateroom was A113. I've worked with augmented reality characters as well. Had super fun. He really was using sensors to get around. We didn't puppeteer him. We gave him sensors everywhere, and he could read our body language, so he could see if you waved and knew that was a wave and could wave back. We would give him instructions like, if somebody approaches you really fast, you probably interpret that as aggressive, so like cover yourself. If somebody stoops down to your level, it's like you do when you're talking to a kid. So I can interpret that as friendly. So approach the person that stooped down to talk to you. You know, if they're friendly, like go ahead and offer them the fist bump and do the. Looks like we have a couple people that have come in. Come on in.
Come on in.
So,
have a seat. Make yourself comfortable. Welcome.
Anyway, so I've got more stuff of that, but it was really fun to do, and this was actually in order to train actual physical robots. So we used an AR character to learn how to use sensors, but that was going to drive our decisions for an actual autonomous free rocking robot.
Wow.
That would physically be in the room with you. So that was fun. And also I had tremendous fun with this. One of our people worked out how to make his shadow on the floor real. So his shadow and my shadow were absolutely real. So people in the room, even if they didn't have goggles, would see his shadow.
Oh, what?
It's so cool. And working with, with performance capture artists. This was the same team that worked with, on Avatar with Cameron.
Amazing.
So I got to work with them right after that. And what we did was for a project outside of Disney and outside of any studios, it was independent. It's called the Marvel Experience, and this was our model for giant domes where I would have do dome projection, and we actually built them. So this is one of the domes, a 160-foot dome, and then 80-foot domes, and so that was the group of domes we had out in Scottsdale, Arizona, as our first place, and we moved it to 4 different cities, and so it was the first time I had done stereoscopic 3D projection inside of domes, and it worked. And you could free walk and just wear simple 3D glasses. And the crazy thing is, you could see your friends during the thing. You weren't isolated. It was kind of like everyone was wearing the same, head-mounted display. Is kind of how it felt. And you were free to move anywhere you wanted in the space while it happened. And then I also done concept art for how to use projections and high-resolution LEDs to engage people in spaces with changing floors, changing walls, spheres that would have shows inside of them and outside. And architecture, I worked with a firm called Interplex, and their architects redid the plans to accommodate a shell of the building that actually would be a screen. And my dream was to have somebody like Retina, who did this artwork, come in and live paint it while you were attending a show at that building. Or to have Beyonce performing inside the show, but have her visible outside on the building itself. And Richard Koshelak, who ran the Hirshhorn Museum for years, asked me to do concepts that would fit inside. They had won an architectural award for the bubble that would be inside of the museum, and said, but what do we do there? So he tasked me, come up with things we do. So I came up with 13 different activities, and this was one of my favorites, was to have giant physical balloons that you launch with a cord, but then project on them as they fly around, and all kinds of fun stuff.
That's so sick.
We projected on people, so I can't show you the whole show, but this is just an example of projecting on someone as they move and have it mapped 360. So it has physics engine stuff, and this was actually wound up being a very heartfelt story about an actress alone in the dressing room, and her mother was going to attend the show, but winds up sending a note, I can't make it. So just alone in the dressing room, she sings, and it's about her relationship with wishing her mother would finally ever see her. And so I wrote all the lyrics, and Ian, my son, did the music for it. And so we wound up having her, during the course of singing this song, have all the things that she's feeling, project on her. So it became an expression of this longing to be seen by her own parent. And people would come watch this, and it was so fun to have the magic you would normally associate with visual effects and post effects in a movie, and have them just sit like this in a room and everyone see the magic right in front of you just happen. So that was quite wonderful. And we had a number of people that would be moved by it and felt like they had some tears they'd be wiping away at the end of that. So
I bet.
Stuff like that, and sculptures, which people are seeing in this gallery. I just love that as a way of expression. Painting for stories, for bringing characters to life. There's a lot of the Strawmen stuff here. In fact, it's at this show, the Rees Pieces show, which we are having our closing reception next weekend. And there are 4 of the 5 Reeses, so Ian and Rebecca and me and Wilder. And my late father's work is here too, his beautiful carvings. And just tipping the domino forward a little bit, Rick Rothschild and I call ourselves R2 Productions, Rees and Rothschild being the two R's. And between the two of us, we have 48 unique theme attractions that we've been involved with, either in directing or producing roles, et cetera, and writing roles, et cetera. So we are collaborating with 7 other companies that are all sort of cutting edge new technology companies to try to shepherd story, character, and emotion and shared human experience into immersive space in brand new ways. And this was at John Musker's I'm Hip screening just a few days ago with some of those rats and Daryl Van Sitters too, but there's Brad Bird and Henry Selick and John Musker and Daryl Van Sitters. So that's
great.
That's the story. That's a tiny part of the story. So yes. So that's kind of the save. Oh, I guess I should save. I did something to it. Okay.
All right.
So I turn it back to you, Alan.
Of course. Thank you for that. So I see everything that you've been doing, glancing, looking at it all. I want to ask something about your childhood. Mm-hmm. Do you remember the moment that you were like, I am an artist? Do you remember the moment where you were like, I am experimental, like this is my thing?
I do remember when I felt that 2 times with animation, like 2 really distinct times.
Okay.
There's
Please.
the seed moment and then the this could really bloom moment. The seed moment went way back to a thing, and you have to be an old guy like me to remember this, but Cracker Jacks used to have a toy inside the box. So candy, coated popcorn, peanuts, and a prize. That's what you get in Cracker Jacks. So one of the prizes inside my Cracker Jacks box was a flip book. And I was a little kid, and I had the flip book, and I flipped it, and I watched a guy that was fishing into a bucket, and he cast the hook into the bucket, and then he pulled, and a fish came out that was way too big to fit in the bucket. And I was like, that's cool. You can make stuff. So then I started doing flip books.
Wow.
And that directly started a whole part of my brain evolving. And my grandma would get very upset because she'd say, he's wasting paper. He does one little drawing on each page, and he does a drawing on every single page. And my mom was like, that's okay. They're cheap pads of paper. But she got a lot of them, and I actually found a box of some of those that I have at home, but found them probably 3 months ago in storage at my parents' house. So it was
so
like stick
these.
figures surfing on waves, and then like a dolphin would go by, and then a shark. There was something like a cigarette, and the cigarette has smoke coming out of it, and then turns into a snake and shows its fangs, and it's like, don't smoke, and stuff like that, where I was just trying.
So this is the seed. What about the bloom?
The bloom was a few years later, and I had grown up in a community where they did not go to the theater to movies. It was the Seventh-day Adventist community was where I grew up. Their teaching at the time was that it was a sin to go to movies. So here I was beginning to fall in love with Disney movies, and in a community where they went, it's okay to watch them, but if you go to a theater to watch them, you're going to hell. So it was a very odd thing. And I had tried to find my way through it.
Okay, gotcha.
Technical problem. But I had found that I had found like the Gulf oil companies had Disney magazines that you could get at the gas station and things like that, where I would start to see, here's Disney, here's animation, and I would send drawings to them, and I saw an opportunity then. There was a youth group that was going to get together every Saturday night for social activities, and I talked them into letting me show short films from Disney to the crowd, because it's like, not in a theater, we're outside in a patio next to the swimming pool and the tennis courts, and I don't see any sinners here. So they let me do it. So I was able to look at a book that had Disney shorts and cartoon parades, they called it, where it would be 3 shorts that would come together in a package. So I would get like Goofy movies and Donald and Pluto and things like Willie the Operatic Whale, things like that were just like beautiful shorts that seemed almost like partly features. And so I was able to put up a rear screen projection screen, set up a 16 millimeter projector, and screen these films. So I'm like, oh my God, I found my way around it. It's like they won't let me step into a theater, but I kind of brought the theater here outside.
Right.
And then I got a peek at a real Disney feature. I was riding home with my dad and mom and my brother, and from visiting my aunt's house. And we go over an overpass over another freeway in our community, and I see the screen to a drive-in theater.
Okay.
Right?
Yes.
There's the Monstro scene from Pinocchio, where it's the big whale chase.
Right.
And I'm in the back seat, and I tell my dad, please pull over. I want to watch this. And he's like, oh, I didn't know. And he's like, he pulls over to the curb and puts his blinkers on, and I roll the window down, and I was just watching at eye level, because I was up high, next,
Right.
not that far from the screen, and just was like, oh my God, this is what it's like to be in a theater watching, like, even I could peek in because it had no walls. It was a drive-in theater. And just the dynamics of that, and I hadn't realized just how impactful and artistic and beautiful and emotional animation could be. I'd gotten a flavor of some of those shorts, but this was just another level. So I talked my dad, I said, please, can we go to it? And it's like he had never gone to a movie in his life. It's like against the teachings. So it was a drive-in, it was late at night, and so he sort of like, we went to the late show at the drive-in, and it was the first time we ventured into this terrible thing of going into a theater. And so I was mesmerized, and then I was just hooked. And now I started trying to animate things. I also tried to talk him into, letting me rent bigger things. So I was able to rent like the dinosaur sequence from Fantasia, the Rite of Spring stuff. And I finally talked him into letting me rent Bambi to show in the church facility. So it's like,
okay.
So you had to have that, the projector in the room, and it was crappy, but at least I got to look at Bambi. So this is like, it's like, yeah, you all want to see it, don't you? Don't you all want to see it? And it's actually for me. It's like, finally I get to get around the rules of the community. And
wow. Meanwhile.
So, eventually I and my whole family sort of left that whole tradition, and still adore people that are part of that community, but have not been part of it for many, many years. And of course have been directly in the inner sanctum of making and experiencing movies in movie theaters. And like with Cranium Command, we built a one-of-a-kind theater that you have to go see it in our theater.
Yeah.
Otherwise you don't experience it. Same thing with Cinemagique. We built one theater that lets actors pass in and out of the screen, have to go there. Mm-hmm. So that moment of seeing Pinocchio, that dynamic sequence, and then thank goodness my dad and mom gave in to letting me go and experience it that night. That just opened up the big dream that it could bloom. Mm-hmm. So then I started high school, and on the first day, one of the teachers said, okay, I want you to take a piece of paper and write down where you're going to be in 5 years and where you're going to be in 10 years. And on mine I wrote 5 years at an art school, 10 years doing something for Disney. And they both happened to be true, but I had no idea how I was going to do it. No idea how to get there.
Wow.
And I think we talked some about that before, about the path
in,
and with the guy that told me I couldn't do it, and then giving me the most important phone number of my life. Something I don't think I did tell you is that Hindel Butoy, who's had a whole career at Disney as well, including like directing sequence for Fantasia 2000, he was back in my old community. And he was showing animation at a festival in a shoebox, where he was outdoors, but he had the box, and it was some kind of box, and he had his projector lined up, and you had to lean down and look and see his animation. So he was another person in my hometown, trying to learn. I gave him that phone number. So, and he called, and he had a career too. So I
Nice.
passed on the hand the right phone number tradition to Hindell.
Nice. What about the moment where you noticed that your work affected someone, that it got to them, whether it's emotionally? Do you remember that moment?
Gosh, I remember striving for that early on because I felt it happening to me from good animation. And, you know, I recall people saying they felt that with certain characters that felt alive. You know, on Fox and the Hound, I animated the little fox and Big Mama and the Dinky and Boomer, the birds, and the hunter. In fact, somebody that I met just recently sent me the list of like every shot in the Fox and the Hound. He just sent it to me like 2 weeks ago, and so I was able to look through and remind myself. It was the draft of our production draft, and it had every single shot and every how many feet and frames it was, because it used to be feet, it was physical, so feet and frames, and a description of it, and who's the animator, and who did the effects, and all of that. And so at the very beginning, there were a lot of stuff I had done with the mother and baby, and some people had mentioned that with Big Mama taking pity on the little, now orphan fox, that they had felt empathy, and so I felt like it was starting to work. And then some people really pointed out not only emotional connection, but a real fascination with the animation I did on the little bird, Dinky, the little bird in that, and
Fox and the Hound.
You know, more stuff has happened since then, but at the time it was considered pretty crazy at Disney. And in fact, Ted Berman, who was one of the directors, wrote a decade later wrote an article and mentioned my animation of the bird, and said in the article, and it was sent to me by an NBC producer in the last 2 years.
Oh, wow.
He found it and he said, I thought you'd find this interesting. He had talked to me about that whole era. He's found it really fascinating in the early 70s through, you know, the 80s, where with my whole generation coming in. He had interviewed me, but he sent this additional thing and said, look what I found. A decade after you finished Fox and the Hound, Ted Berman, in an article, mentions since the days of Snow White, we had ways of animating birds until this guy Jerry Rees came along and then completely reinvented how they would move and how they felt alive. And
amazing.
And I had really been trying to follow Eric Larson, my tutor's instructions with that, where he and actually, frankly, all of them did that. Like Frank Thomas Ollie Johnson and Eric and Milt would say, please study life. Look around you. Don't just copy what we did. Try to bring in new things that come from your observations. And so I knew we were going to be animating birds, and I remember being at the Disney commissary eating my lunch, and we had some very brave birds that would come up, and we had some jays that would actually come up and like grab stuff out of your plate. And then we had sparrows that would come around and everything. And I was noticing the sparrows, I just went, gosh, they're doing like 2 or 3 poses in 1 second. And I'm not confused. I completely can read that. It's like, so we should be able to animate that. But it broke a lot of rules in animation. It's like, no, be clear and be simple, and don't do too many things. It's too complex. But they keep it clear. I know there's a path to this. So
gorgeous.
So I figured out some things to do, and Ted, and this makes his note in the article especially kind of ironic. At the time, their first reaction when they saw the animation of the birds was they were delighted, charmed, thought it was great, that everybody should copy that. And in fact, they thought it was such a flash in the pan. They're like, oh, can you flop it and reuse it in another section? And I went, well, no, I can just animate it. I know how to. I invented that approach, so I can just do another scene. Oh, okay. But they immediately thought, oh, it happened once, copy it. And it was like, no, I'll keep inventing. But as soon as they flipped the drawings and saw how I had done it, with stretch drawings, and like when the character would take off, had the bird, it would be there, and then just start to move, tiny movement, and then just be a streak of color and look like it had 15 wings, and then just be gone. And they flipped that. And so first delighted on the screen. Great, love your animation. Then flip it. Oh, no, you can't do that. That's too cartoony. That doesn't fit in a Disney feature. No.
So they just saw something that you did work.
And I'm like, wait. But they kept doing that. It's like if I'd show it to them in movement, loved it. If they looked at the stack of drawings, they would destroy it.
Wow.
So Rebecca and Sue Croyer, Rebecca Rees, at Malloy at the time, she and Sue conspired to help me. So when I would do my animation, they would take out all the offending, extreme, stretched drawings and hide them. And they would take it to be approved. And they'd flip through and like, okay, Jerry didn't do any of the bad things. Now we can let it through. So then they would put them back in, send it to ink and paint, and it would get done and filmed. And so we had to sneak around their backs for the entire film to get any of those shots in.
Wow.
And then 10 years later, he's saying, what an amazing bird stuff Jerry did. And it's like, yeah, we had to fool you to get it in. It's like, it's just insane. But when I saw people feeling empathy towards the little fox and Big Mama, and then I saw them feeling sort of charmed by the bird in a special way, I felt like I was starting to tap into the characters coming alive tradition that makes Disney special.
Right. I think a lot of people take that for granted when it comes to the amount of animators that are working on one film, and you talking about how people will talk about how they were affected by a certain character, and know that you worked on that specific character and that specific moment, that movement that affected the audience. When I look up, other animators like your wife and other people and what they've worked on, I can see all the different characters that they worked on and the different scenes that they worked on and how that's affected people. I'd love to know, you've worked with Disney for decades, and so you went through Disney's different eras. I would love to know, what was your experience when it comes to noticing, the different eras that Disney was going through, the different highs and lows, changes in CEOs from, Michael Eisner to the next? What was that journey like for you?
Well, it was strange to see, because it was a very sort of split experience where you had a consistent message coming from all the veterans. They wanted to keep pioneering. They would cheer innovations, like when I, for instance, introduced that new movement approach for the birds. Eric Larson's reaction was the opposite of that what had been from the two directors. He said, I want you to give a talk. I want you to get people together and basically tell them to be insurrectionists against the rules.
Nice.
And he sat in the back of the room and jingled his keys in his pocket happily while I showed nature footage of birds and went, I've been told that it's too cartoony to do a bird this way. Here's a real bird, shot by a real camera. Oh, look, he's doing it. I guess it's not too cartoony.
Right.
And you know what? We have to just do this stuff and be bold. And in fact, our job is really to stylize and caricature nature. And nature already went as far as I did. Like, what would it be like to go further? So you had people like Eric supporting that, wanting that. And also, one message he wanted me to spread, and I did, was we all came into the studio as individual souls, individual artists, that each had our own style and an approach to storytelling and character. And then as soon as we're together on a film and telling one story, there's this part of it's necessary, which is now you have to imitate the same style for a movie. It's like, this is the film style. This is the kind of gesture palette for a specific character. So you have to blend. You have to match each other. You can't just go, oh, here's Alan's scene. Oh, now it's Jerry's scene. I saw the switch. But it's the same character, but I just noticed that two different artists did it. You have to sort of disappear behind the character is consistent no matter who touches it. So there is a sameness that you have to learn. But inside of that, there's a danger that once you do that, it just becomes generic. Characters cease to have their individual spark. So my admonition to them was, yes, we all have to match style, but now we have to really study each character and go, what makes this character itself and different from the character next to it? What happens that makes it unique? Now, all of us that are blending together have to remember, for this character, there's this spike of difference that has to show up, otherwise it's not itself. And you move to the next character, we all have to match, but there's a different set of rules for this character too. It has to have its own personality, its own emotions and thoughts. So respecting differences in characters and trying to underline and highlight them so that there's really is an illusion of life, character by character, and they don't all start acting the same as well as looking the same. Trying to really push that was something that was encouraged by the veterans. There was another force that happened early on aggressively at the time, which was don't make things too emotional, don't spend too much time on anything, make it easier to do so you get more footage done. If it doesn't have a lot of difference, that's okay, because it'll still go out in the theaters and people will still pay a ticket. There were things like that that were being pushed as well. So you had to kind of find your way. In the meantime, Ron Miller, who was there at the first regime, was good-hearted and wanted the best to happen. He would do things like take us on chartered fishing trips and just say, I'm taking all the animators with me, instead of, usually I take all the executives. Now it's all the animators. And he took us on like a 2-day fishing trip and had beers with us and would really ask, like, what do you think we could do to make the place better? And I really want to carry on my father-in-law's tradition, and I'm a little lost when it comes to animation. You guys, what do you think? So he would really pick our brains for opinions and stuff. So we saw that whole mix where you had like copy, repeat, don't challenge, and then like be innovative and wild, and let's do the next disruption like we did with Snow White. You guys figure out the next thing. And then the guy at the top going, I'm hoping to have my compass will point a direction, but I'm not quite sure yet. So it kind of started there, and then went through some bumpy times. I had left to go try starting the Spirit with Brad and Gary, and we were hearing about Cauldron going through again, not being the big disruption people hoped it would be to push forward. And then other measures being taken, like let's not do any more 2D animation, let's just do only CG and get rid of the desks. And it was going through all kinds of different things. And we looked, frankly, at what Brad and I were trying to do to go beyond Disney. You have to remember, we were trying to do that to protect the Disney tradition that we loved. Like, there's been some people recently I read in a book that like, the author was saying like, well, I was following what would Walt do, but Jerry and Brad and a bunch of people were just like ignored all of that and went off. And it was like, no, the reason we went off is because we felt like what would Walt do, which, Eric Larson and Frank and Ollie, those guys were cheering us on. We felt like, well, if they won't let us do it here, even though the veterans want to do it, they were vetoing the veterans. I think I told you the story about Frank and Ollie.
Yes.
They were being edited. Like Frank and Ollie did something that was too emotional to fit in a movie. It's like too impactful. And it's like, okay, if they can't even do it there, but they're trying to follow what would Walt do. Mm-hmm. We are too. They're inside the studio walls being kept from doing it. Right. So maybe escaping from those studio walls, we can keep the Disney flame alive, right? So we were doing it in the spirit of keeping the Disney flame alive, doing the innovation that the pioneers told us to do. And they cheered. They saw the early CG tests and stuff, and Frank and Ollie were like, yeah, it's another canvas, guys. Go into it and find the characters, find the emotion, find the stories. And so when Pixar came along, when John went up and started working with them on things like Andre and Walibi and before Pixar, and then they made Pixar, there was a whole group of people that saw that as something other than Disney and Renegade too. All of us that worked together, our peers, including John, we saw that as that was his way to do the same thing Brad and I were trying to do, which is protect the Disney flame. And their approach to storytelling, I mean, Joe Rampt went up after working with us on Toaster. He became sort of the pilot light of storytelling up at Pixar, and that was all very much in, Bill Pete and, Disney tradition of storytelling was at the heart of what Pixar was doing. And they weren't magical because it was computer graphics. It was because it was good storytelling and characters and emotion. It just so happened computers was the canvas they were working on. So we saw all of that as being keepers of the Disney flame, where we could find a protective fortress. And we tried to make that fortress with Gary Kurtz and the Spirit, and the timing wasn't quite right, but John was able to create it with Steve Jobs and Pixar, and we cheered him on, and we all saw that as a continuation of protecting the Disney flame.
Amazing.
Yeah.
So you made Brave Little Toaster in 1987, and then these Disney animated features you worked on, they were early 80s, and you didn't work on a Disney animated feature after Brave Little Toaster. After that, you worked on attractions.
Although I did go back and spend some time with the Fantasia 2000 crowd developing things for so I spent quite a bit of time there.
Could you tell me about that?
Ultimately, they had kicked everybody out of the animation building on Buena Vista Street, and it was a building on Flower Street where later I would come back and do a ton of Imagineering things. But so for a while I was working with Don Ernst and various other people there, and my dream, I wish it could have happened, it was on my bucket list, work with Jack Lemmon. I so respected Jack Lemmon. Oh my God. I still, when I was doing the project with the projection on people thing, I talked to my performers about Jack Lemmon, and that I had heard this story that on the set he would say, even just to himself, before every take, it's magic time. And he meant it, it's like, we have to make this happen. So I just thought, what a great thing. So my performers would be behind the curtain, and as the crowd would start coming in, I'd go, it's magic time, to the curtain. So behind, they'd hear me say that and go, okay, here we go. So on Fantasia 2000, when he was still alive, I was drawing up storyboards for how he would be the host to stitch all the things together. And I went, I'm going to get to work with Jack. And Corey Burton was doing tracks again and just sounding amazing for Temp, and as a voice, Temp voice. And we put together whole sequences. Ultimately, it wound up going a different direction, but for a while the spark was alive that I would be able to work with Jack and work with the Fantasia update. I'm glad people did, and Hindell, who I had handed the phone number to when he was at his little projector out in an arts and crafts fair in Loma Linda, was there directing one of the sequences.
Nice.
So yeah, that was sweet. Although it is memorable to me for another reason too. It's very tedious, but my lawyer and my agent got on the phone with me, and they said, we want you to walk outside and to anything that you need, take with you, and then call me back. And okay. So I go outside, and they, okay, you're outside? Yes? Okay, promise you won't go back in until we work something out. It's been 6 months, and you've been working for them every day, and you haven't gotten paid once for anything. So we're going to tell them now and tell them that you are not returning to the building until you get paid. So that was part of Fantasia 2000. I think.
Wow.
Like, well, in the future, you'll get paid. So they worked it out, and then they finally wrote a check. I don't know what the holdup was.
Wow.
That was part of my memory at the time too.
That's
but yes,
crazy.
then dove into theme park things, and then it was just, gosh, it was like, as you could see, it's like everything available for storytelling.
Right.
What a playground. I mean, I've heard it described as a sandbox. In fact, the head of R&D was offering me a big sandbox to play in with storytelling, and boy, did they deliver on that. It's just so fun to be handed a new story, a new magical moment, a new theater, new technology. And it's like, nobody's done this before. Everybody's done part of it and aspects of it, but they've never made this thing happen before. So all of you are pioneers now, and you're going to invent how this even happens.
Right.
And then there's a camaraderie, and there's such a push forward into the new. And then people have that flush of new experience when they come in and get to feel it. And then there was good training over the years too to remember, because at the beginning we could unveil something there and it'd be years before the technology we unveiled would be available for the public. And then as time went on, there was a quicker and quicker curve where you're planning something, but it takes you 3 or 4 years to get into the park. And by the time you open, Like everybody has the same tech in their own house on their own mobile
Right,
phones. That they're
right.
like, oh, we can all do that already. It's not. So, but it was a good lesson to go. If it's still going to be part of your palette of storytelling, fine, but don't rely on the novelty to be the point. It's like it can be part of your storytelling palette, but it has to go back to, do I care about the character and the story? Do I feel emotions from it? Do I connect? Like, it's like, don't depend on the novelty to be the thing. So.
So you got to see changes in the animation department while you were there at Disney, and you started working with them on theme parks. What about when you watch newer Disney films nowadays? You mentioned that you got to witness, a struggle between, the old days and, the new ways, and finding a mix, a blend, and sticking to, story, and they're just holding back. How do you feel when you watch a newer film from Disney?
Well, it's all over the map for me.
Right, each film is a different case.
Yeah, but there were moments where I saw things like, and somebody mentioned this to me recently, the Incredibles, which Brad did such a brilliant job on. It's like the spirit was very much that world. It was, the film noir hero, he wore the mask, it was high adventure, it was not kiddie tone, and just, it's strange looking at that, all the years that it took, but Brad and I and a bunch of other people were ready to do that kind of entertainment in 81, 82. I mean,
Yes.
way back earlier than that. But to see it finally happen, it was like such a feeling of satisfaction where you're like, so part of it's exhaling and then you're just so cheering for each other. I told Brad that his work on Ratatouille, where I had seen wonderful things come out of Pixar, just a huge fan, and Toy Story, just absolutely delightful. The characters vividly coming to life. But then I saw his work on Ratatouille, and he added this thing that I hadn't experienced since I had actually checked scenes out of, it was called the morgue at Disney. It was their library of scenes. It's like, you go to the morgue, and it was like, but it was a lot of films going way back to things like Pinocchio, where it was the original stack of drawings, of the rough animation drawings before they were cleaned up, and
Wow.
between two pieces of cardboard with rubber bands around it. And you could ask in the early days when you go there, say, Milt called it an amazing scene of Jiminy Cricket trying to catch up with Pinocchio and putting his coat on and stuff. I want to flip the drawings and see how he did that. And they would bring it on a cart to your room and put it down and go, we would pick this up in
That's
what,
so
2 or
cool.
3 days
That's
next week.
gorgeous.
And we all just trusted each other, and everybody I knew respected that. Later, unfortunately, there were some people that started stealing things and stuff. But in our time, we absolutely treasured and respected every drawing, and made sure it got back safely to where it went. But we were able to flip through that scene and scene by scene look at every choice that Milt had made to make that come alive and learn. And I hadn't felt that in CG. I had felt delight and wonderful, but that moment where you go, oh my God, he like twisted this thing for one frame, and then he made like the accent of like the hand pointing, the hand got longer for a couple of frames, and
Yes.
and it, like he would just go, oh, he opened his mouth like 3 frames before the sound came out, and why did he do that? And just all this discovery that is not just general action, but eccentric nuance per frame of making something happen. And usually those nuances that aren't just like, here's A and here's B, okay, in between, or computer just make things go dink, 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 dink to get there. It's like, what is happening on the way? What is unique that in that traveling is keeping it alive and not just getting there? And I told Brad when watching through Ratatouille, that was the first time I felt the impulse to do frame by frame through Remy's movement and stuff. I'm like, this character is as alive frame by frame in a good way as the classic characters that I used to flip.
Wow.
And he had invented, and I think some people loved it, and it might have driven some people a little crazy, but he had a tool made where he could in 2D draw over the screen, over the 3D character. So you'd be able to say, well, I'd like during this pose to have this arc emphasized or have this stretch longer, whatever, and he could just do a 2D drawing on the screen above the CG character. And they'd go, yeah, but then it's going to make this thing bulge out the side of his head. And it's like, well, the camera's not going to be there. I'm only seeing it from this angle and from this angle, and I'm committing.
Right.
I won't change my mind later and go, well, I'll suddenly put the camera over there where it'll show the trick. It's like, no, this is the camera angle. Let's make this thing a beautiful moment from this angle, and I don't care what it does to the model. And it just resulted in some beautifully alive animation and characters. And so that was a joyous thing to see that happen. And then I've seen other things where there's unique styles that come along per story, and then some others where it seems like sometimes the story doesn't give birth to a style. It feels like this is a convenient sort of art direction approach for any number of stories, and then you start to feel a little sameness coming along, and then it's also really convenient to drag and drop gestures and expressions, and subconsciously you feel this kind of not alive in the moment, but it's like, yeah, I've seen it, heard it before. You know, an analogous thing is in audio, your ear gets used to sounds, and I would I'd hear something in the Sword in the Stone animated feature, and then later hear a little, whoa, you know, the boy would make some fumble thing and go, oh, they reused it again, and
Right.
again, and again, and you know, you feel this, it takes you out of the moment. It reminds you of, oh, it's a library of things, and there's sort of a common place they're grabbing stuff from and making this conglomerate moment instead of its own unique moment right now. But it's kind of irresistible when you're dealing with big crews and big budgets and tough schedules and lots of money to just go quick solution, throw in, and we'll do, this character will do that, and the next character will also do that, and the next character will do it, but maybe a little bigger, but it's like we all do. And then, you know, as an audience member, I just feel like I'm stepping into part 2, 3, 4, 5 of the same story instead of stepping into 5 different stories. So whenever I do see a commitment to style born out of story and character behavior that is its own eccentric self, big cheers.
Nice.
When I see the sameness, I understand the reasons why it's convenient, but I think ultimately it starts to weigh down the value of animation as a beautiful thing, and within studios, you know, in DreamWorks and Disney and Blue Sky and stuff, when they used to exist, and Pixar, you know, you want to have keep the brand sparkling, and I feel like if there's just too many repetitions of the sameness will start to diminish the shine of the brand, because people love surprise and delight and being taken into the new. It's part of the reason they step into the story space with us, and so I think audiences deserve that, and so it's worth a little bit of extra effort to get you there, and I think it's money well spent and time well spent if it has originality that will give bloom to new fans and to have a long sort of loyalty from the fans that exist, because they go, man, there's a reason for me to really look forward to the next thing. And you know, some people go, I'm looking forward to the next thing because it's going to be the same thing, but not that many. A lot of people go like, I love to know that I'm reassured that they're going to do the same effort into story, character, and emotion. That's comfort. But I would like to see new characters that have new structure to their face, new eyeballs, new mouths, new way things are structured, and why do they look that way? Because that's how this story styled them. And I remember way back getting invited it was a very flattering moment, but back when Lucas was originally first starting to set up an animation division, they got in touch with me to see if I would consider taking that position to head the animation department for Lucas.
Wow.
And I'd had wonderful experience with him. I mean, I'd suddenly been up there directing him for the short. He sent me to redo the stunt theater story before he opened it. He gave me permissions on the Cinemagique Star Wars scenes, and later on, you know, we dove into worlds together with the, you know, the Star Wars land and all that stuff. So there's just a lot of
I don't know how many people are asked, can you work on the biggest things? Can you work on Star Wars? Can you work on Marvel? It's the biggest things. You have your hand in it. It's crazy.
Yep. But what we were talking about, George, just before that, going back.
Oh goodness gracious! You were talking about the stunt show, George Lucas.
Yeah, but just before it started that with George.
Because
it was their division.
Yes.
So here was like another wonderful thing. It's like, would you consider heading up this division? Very flattering. So my first question to them, and they said, well, you'd have to move up to Northern California. You'd have to move up to the Bay Area to do this. So I said, okay, that's a big commitment. So I said, okay, would I have permission in running this division to assure the audience that the one thing they could know for sure is that every time the new surprise box comes from the Lucas division and they open it, it's going to be a brand new style. It's going to be the new story will give birth to a new style, and you're guaranteed a surprise.
Right.
And they went, no.
Wow.
No, we want to open the box and have the same thing come out. It's like, okay, well, I can't move my whole family for that. But they're for that particular their business model and whatever expectations and production costs, whatever, they had an expectation of sameness was the anchor, and but they still flew me up and wanted to, even though I was saying no. And I said, look, I'm sure you have people lining up asking for this job and kissing your feet. It's so I'm one of the few that's saying thanks but no thanks, but they're like, oh, you have to come up and visit anyway. So we had a very nice visit together. But I looked at a moment like that and went, it's a brave thing for a company to embrace that. And gosh, Walt and the team always did. Mm-hmm. Gosh, you look at Tyrus Wong designing Bambi. And it's like, that was, you've just committed.
Yeah.
And you go, Sleeping Beauty and Dumbo and 101 Dalmatians, everyone just went into a new space. And so you absolutely felt the Disney brand, but you were happy to step into different worlds. But the braveness was always there. I mean, from the first time, from Snow White, that was like a super brave moment of just put it all on the line for bankruptcy. Mm-hmm. And what you were counting on was not the novelty. It's like everybody was the illusion of movement from stacks of drawings shot under a camera was happening everywhere by then. Mm-hmm. So it's like the novelty is not the thing. What are you betting on? It's like, well, I'm betting on emotionally drawing you into the point where you care about the characters and you cry when they're in trouble and you cheer when they survive and you are addicted now and you want to go back to the theater and tell your friends and you're going to want to see my next story. That's what I'm betting on, is the emotional gamble. Yeah. And that's what worked. Mm-hmm. So I feel like the people that are scared, it's like, well, if you link your bravery to that, it's a good bet as long as you're being honest about that stuff. And other than that, have style born out a story.
Do you think we have time for a deleted scene before break? I don't know what time it is.
It's a good time to take a break. There's some questions too, and maybe now's a good time to take a break and come back to that.
Okay, and then there's any number of things, but included the teaser to come back, one of many. But
yes.
But I do have deleted scenes. I even surprised you with one.
Yes, I'm excited for that.
There's the Crazy Ernie deleted scene, which I haven't shown anyone yet. There's the Sleepy Mole deleted scene, which I did show a few people at the reunion. And then there's the Kirby and the Squirrels deleted scene, and the taxi driver gopher, also from the Brave Little Toaster. So those things are coming up.
All right.
I have the storyboards in a PowerPoint. So.
We'll be back.
See you soon.
All right.
And we are back. Yes, we're back. How's everyone doing? Hello. So, we left off, and we got teased deleted scenes from Brave Little Toaster.
Yes.
Please, I'd love to see them. I don't. There's
well,
some
a lot
in
of
there
people
that
have
I
asked about
haven't
it.
seen. A lot of people want to see them.
Yes.
It's a film that we grew up with. It's how I discovered you, to be honest. And so this really means a lot to me.
Cool. Well, I am finally able to share some of this stuff because I finally got out the pile of storyboards from the film that are in one box. I actually have a little PowerPoint later on I could show you if you want to see how they've been stored, but they've just been shoved together in a box, and I scanned 2,820 individual storyboard panels, thanks to getting a tabletop scanner that Tina had turned me on to, Caesar scanner, downsop table, and it has a foot pedal, and it auto-corrects after it takes the picture, so I could get through a lot of them in a day. So it still took a long time, but in scanning those, finally I can show people some of the sequences that are either in as they were storyboarded or the things that were taken out. So,
Right.
So if you'd like to, I can take you through Crazy Ernie. Finally, letting you
Yes.
see
How
he would have appeared.
How long is Brave Little Toaster runtime?
90 minutes.
90 minutes.
Yes.
Okay. So these are scenes that were cut out because the film had to be 90 minutes.
We were running long, and we had to finish the film, not just for running length, but because how many months we were overseas. That we had 6 months on the schedule. We had all sublet our apartments and things back in the U.S. for 6 months while we were there. Everything was worked out in the budget for a 6-month trip. So it's just as they had the pile of animation, and I was just building it in the editing room just ahead. So it was like writing just ahead of the boards, boarding just ahead of the layout, and then as we were animating, I was actually building the reel just ahead of the animation. And so we just started dealing with how much was flowing through production. And Chuck Richardson, who was head of production, said, it's too much to fit in 6 months. And it's like looks like we're going over 90 minutes and just over time and resources. So he would ask me, like, can you just lose this scene? And I would be like, no, but I could lose like a few seconds here and a couple frames there. And he got so frustrated. Finally, he gave up because I wound up mainly doing micro edits through the entire film instead of cutting any big thing out. But there were a couple things where I did cut out kind of a chunk. And so Crazy Ernie was one of them. And anybody who's seen the film knows that the television that's trying to talk Rob and Chris into going out to the junkyard to maybe be able to find and save the appliances from getting crushed has been advertising Ernie's and has been embellishing it more and more until they finally, says that Crazy Ernie's total embargo, crazy, and does this whole thing. So, of course, that finally gets their attention. When Rob drives out there, their first thing is to stop at Crazy Ernie's place and ask his permission to look through the junkyard. So that's actually the scene, is they drive up to the trailer and they are looking for Crazy Ernie. So it goes like this. So this part you've seen where you see the sign, it pans down to see them in the car, and he says, I love the way Wayne Katz messed this line up kind of wonderfully. This doesn't look like Crazy's Emporium, a total amazing bargain madness. And she goes, it's the right address. So then they drive down the road. So you've seen that.
Right.
But here's the part you haven't seen.
Oh.
They pull up at a little trailer. And they knock on the door. Dunk, dunk, dunk. And they wait. And then the door opens. And a guy looks at him. And then he pulls the fork out of his mouth and uses his finger, boom, to bump the door open, and it slams open. He's a strong, big dude. And so he's just staring out, and he goes, are you crazy? Hi, are you Crazy Ernie? And he stares at him, and he goes, my name's Ernie. My mom thinks I'm crazy, but I'm not. And he stabs his plate and peas and carrots go flying everywhere. It's like a TV dinner, it's like metal tray. And so he's getting rained with food that's been scattering everywhere. And Daryl did a few extra drawings of him peeling a carrot off of his glasses as a pea comes down and boinks him on the nose, and he's kind of dismayed. And his next instinct is to step back away from Crazy Ernie. So now you see what's going on out there, that the masher is still crunching away, and the camera pans down, and you see the characters there. And
they're witnessing this?
So no, this part stayed in the film. So now the magnet is, so now we're back to what is in the film. So the magnet comes up and is threatening them, and it starts pulling things with its magnetic force, including stretching Lampy until he whacks onto it. And then now you're back to them, and now Rob has actually taken refuge behind Chris because he's scared of Ernie, and says, well, what about the TV ads? And he's just, TV. He's very happy. And he goes, yeah, you know, the Bargain Madness. And he goes, oh, is it going around? So he thinks Bargain Madness is going around. And then you're back to slam, the toaster gets pulled against the door anyway. So now you cut back and he goes, oh, I see. Well, if you can find anything out there you want, you can have it. Points, and then it just says, he drops his arm down and he goes, really? You mean? And he goes, no charge. And he backs away. So she goes, go for it, and bumps him. And now you're back with the characters as you, this remained in the film. So they're hanging off the bottom edge. As it swirls around, you see them looking down, and poor Blanky has the picture of the master that he's been carrying this whole time. And he's sadly still clutching it. It has a couple little bite marks from the mice from the meadow. And he goes to wipe his brow, and it falls out of his hands, or his hands, his little blanky, his blanky hands. And it goes falling down, down, down past the camera and to the junkyard below, and you see the person there. And Blanky recognizes and goes, look, it's him. So he's excited, and you know, Toaster and Radio don't get it yet. Kirby, they're all like realizing they're gonna die together. That's looking on the bright side. And but he goes, no, it's him, it's the master. And so they take a look, and they see him like, where? And sure enough, it's him, way down below. And so they think maybe he still needs us. And so they get dropped onto the conveyor belt. And then you see Rob is rummaging around, and he comes up with a radio, and he goes, wow, cool. He blows the dust off, and the speaker goes springing out. And then he goes to pick it up and is startled because he sees under his foot a picture of himself. And so he picks it up and is freaked out, drops the radio, and he goes, hey, Chris. And she's trying to pull the grill off the car because it's a really cool one. She goes, hey, these are hard to find. And so she's working at it, and he goes, he walks into the shot and goes, this is me. And he's very confused. What? I can't hear you. And he goes wandering off. So anyway, that's, and then she finally gets the grill off. And then she's happy. It's like, yay, I got the grill. So those are collectible.
Nice.
So anyway, that's how Crazy Ernie originally was part of it, that they went to ask permission. They mistakenly thought he was Crazy Ernie. He resented being called crazy, and I was trying to find a voice that would be really fun, oafish kind of character for that, and but we've ultimately decided that was something where I could keep it moving along and just ignore that. You don't know if there's anybody who tends to the place necessarily. You just arrive and they start looking around, and you never deal with it. So
he ended up being a thief after deleting that scene because he never asked permission. But it is his own stuff, though. So
yes,
there's that way of looking at it too.
Yes.
I love that. Yeah, even though they are about to get crushed, at least they're happy that Master came back for them.
Yeah, and they think maybe he still needs us. You know, that's the whole
Right.
thing of being needed and necessary, and it's like something everybody can relate to. The last thing they want is to be unneeded. So now I also have the mole deleted scene, and I have the Kirby and the squirrels deleted scene. Now I did show the mole
I think
scene
I remember
before.
you telling me that the mole scene, one of the reasons why it was deleted is because you didn't want the audience to be yawning along
Yes.
with them.
Should I run through that again today?
Yeah,
No, I
for
did it
sure,
with
for
the
sure.
poster.
Deleted scenes.
The mole, deleted scene. Part of this, again, is stuff you've seen. Part of it is new. So this part you would be familiar with it.
Yeah, I love recognizing, the scenes in it and seeing the new stuff.
Yeah, so they've just finished
Right.
the song, City of Light, but now they're getting to where it looks more sort of creepy and brambly and thickety. And they finally stop and look forward, and Kirby's trying to figure out how to deal with this brush. So he looks back, and he sets himself from a low carpet to shag carpet, and gets higher up, and then anticipates, and he like plows into that. And as he's plowing through, we see ahead of them a hole, a little mole look out of the ground. And he starts getting sucked by Kirby, whack, up into his little mouth. And he goes, funny tasting dirt. But he keeps going. And so now you hear the mole going, let me out, from inside. Let me out. And they continue and burst into the thicket, whack. And he's coughing from all the brambles and the mole fur. And, hey, everybody, look, a clearing. Yeah, great. Let's spread out the picnic blanket and have a picnic. But I'm all full of stickers. Well, my bag's full of thistles and sticks and God knows what else. We changed to who knows what else.
Right.
Whose idea was it to come this way anyway? Why, it was the lamps, I tell you. Oh, yeah? He comes up. Well, who's the big shot navigator? And Toaster's going, yeah, where are we anyway? And then he backs up, and that's where he sees the little
Love that
rock
bit.
on the ground, and like, Pee Wee Reese is at the place. He does the whole thing, and wind up, and there's the pitch. And he whacks it, and it does a three-way ricochet. Bam, 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 off of them. And it's a triple play. And then he retreats. And I'm so glad in the film that I added that Lampy is holding the rock, which he puts down. It's not in the storyboard. Because he's like he was ready to like, club him with the rock, and
that's
him
right.
dropping the rock is part of the fun there. So then he's like, knock it off, you guys. So in this scene is where Lampy drops the rock
Right.
in the film. Why don't we all settle down and get some sleep? And that means you too, to the blanket. Blanket flops down, but I'm not tired. And then we hear, and from inside the bag. And then Kirby's freaking out. There's something in my bag. And he's like freaking around, and it's vibrating, and he's whipping around one way and another. And then he says, get it out, get it out. And you still hear the snoring come from inside. And so Toaster unzips, and then you see Toaster is shocked. Lampy is shocked. And the radio is shocked. And Blanky is shocked. Because as the mold nose is sticking out of the Kirby's bag, and it slowly comes out of the bag and plops down on the ground, and then it just sits and looks at him and then goes, big yawn. They're looking at him, and then Blanky goes, and then Toaster goes, and the mole is looking, there's a bigger yawn, and then they're all yawning. And then Toaster finally has had it. Hey, he's cut that out. And then you see Toaster looks, and you swish pan over, and you see freshly dug dirt. There's a new hole, and shot from down in the hole looking up, and Toaster looks over, and the snoring takes you out to the end of the sequence. And then it's after that that you have Lampy, finding the place to rest his head and stuff. And then the rest proceeds as is. But that's the deleted mole scene. And yes, it was fun, but I did need to try to find some footage to take out. And I felt like, well, I can do without it, and it might make an audience that's full of people in a theater start to yawn. And as I said last time, Rebecca and I tried it on our cat, and it worked. You can make a cat yawn. So it probably would have made the whole theater full of people yawn. And then there's another one if you'd like to hit a third deleted scene.
Yes, the one I don't know about.
Kirby and the Squirrels. Remember in the meadow scene where there's a whole operatic piece? It's like the Busby Berkeley thing. There's a fish singing. There's the bird trying to get the worm, and
the squirrel.
Yes. And so you have here, yes, you have the fish. Is the fish over here? Well, the fish
there's
is
a
part
fish.
of the meadow.
There's
there's a little singing fish.
That
Yes, so there's a worm, and the fish is holding onto it, and the bird's holding onto it, and there's a part where it goes splashing down into the water, and the little worm gets away in a bubble. So there's like this part here where you got
oh my goodness!
Bubble, right?
That's pretty.
Now, what used to happen? Well, what happens in the film is as the little worm, which I wanted you to see that the worm survived.
Right.
So it's in the bubble, and it kind of wiggles away and goes swimming away, and it leaves more bubbles. And in the film, they come up and form, and then it dissolves to Toaster's face, so the eyes match the bubbles kind of match the eyes, and it's Toaster, and Toaster is looking upset, and all the squirrels are making faces in the Toaster's chrome.
Oh, that would have been such a pretty transition.
So we did that in the film. This is what I had before that. Back when it was boarded, there was a much longer thing to lead to that. So a bunch of this stuff went out. It used to go from the bubbles to acorns instead of Toaster's face. So bubbles to acorns, and then the acorn was picked by a squirrel, and then the squirrel would kind of bowl it along the limb, bum-ba-da-bum-ba-da-bum, and it would thump, roll, roll, roll. These are Daryl's boards. And it would go rolling, and then we would follow it as it curves around a limb and goes down closer to the trunk of the tree and ricochets off a branch, very sort of intricate ricochet pattern, and winds up going into a hole in the tree. But you see some of them go in, and then some of them bounce out, and you follow one of the wayward ones down to the ground, and you see there's a bunch that missed the hole. So they're doing their put the acorns in the bank, and some of them aren't making it. So a squirrel comes down and gathers them up, puts them in his cheeks, takes them up into the tree, and deposits them back in the hole. It's like doing a little cleanup. So Kirby's looking at that on the ground, and if you remember at the beginning of the film, there's one little piece of lint that lands on the carpet, and he immediately goes to vacuum it up. It's like one piece of lint is too much because he's a vacuum. So now he's looking at all this and going like, there's acorns everywhere. So he watches again. It's like, let me see, there's those guys. They have their acorns. You've got all this stuff on the ground. So then he can't resist and then just vacuums it all up into his bag, gets it completely clean. Now it's all in his bag, and then he winds up and dumps it into the tree. And the squirrels are like, oh my gosh, look at that. Every acorn is in here. They can't believe it. They applaud him. Yay. So then they're like, yeah, this guy's pretty cool. They're coming to check him out. The camera keeps panning over. You see the echo. Oh, what is this radio? And they're bending Lampy's neck. And you see Blanky is already being cuddled by the little mice now. So everybody's having a good time, but not Toaster. Toaster is not having a good time. You see, like, blah, 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 blah. So this part's in the film. This used to be what the bubbles dissolve to.
Right.
And so, I had a bunch of fun. Me and Joe and various people did the frog voices that are all making faces at him. And so it came to this part where, like, get out of here. Give me some space. And they keep moving in. And, hey, fellas, come here. Look at this. Was one of my lines. And as they move in and just make him feel more and more overpowered, behind you see a little gopher who's doing a taxi driver thing. You talking to me? You talking to me? And nobody else here. So he's like going into this whole thing. And Toaster turns around and then he's freaked out. Ah! And then he goes and retreats down the hall. So, and then it continues to build up. And the fish even comes and sings la 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 and kisses himself in the reflection. Wah! And dives back in the water. And then it just gets too much. And Toaster freaks out and goes running for the horizon. And the squirrels all chase as well. So that's used to be how it went. So it was a lot more stuff going on. It was the sort of the Meadow characters discovering them and Kirby showing what he could do and all of that. So
now, Jerry, we have a backlog of questions that were sent to you over the years.
It's true. I've talked to people about this before. I have answered as many people as I can, and typically what happens, sometimes I can answer people right away. Sometimes what happens is they'll ask something really meaningful, like college studies or some kind of thing that deserves a nice answer, and I don't have time to really do justice to that, so I'll write back and go, got your note, I don't have time to do justice for it now, but I intend to get back to you. And then find a time. And it might be 2 or 3 weeks later. I'll take like 3 or 4 hours on a Sunday and sit down and actually write a thoughtful reply. And it's trying to do justice. Some of them are simpler, but some of them are like, where should I go to college? Or, this career path, what do you think? And you feel like, well, you don't want to just do kind of full letter stuff. So I try to backlog things and study them and really do each one justice as I can. And like I say, I've done a few, but and I've had some people write back and they get it, and we do like a back and forth, and that's been nice. But there's a lot of people who I know are frustrated that I either wrote the first note back, like I'll get to it when I can, and then I didn't get back to it, or they just heard nothing from me. But I do have it set aside, tagged as the to get to list. So I sent Alan like a dozen.
We don't know if we'll go through all of them.
To get to list, and some of them go back as long as 8 years ago.
Yes, they do actually.
But I kept them.
Mm-hmm. And we have some of them have names, some of them have more info. But also, if we wanted to open up to questions in the room while we go through this, that works too.
Did anybody have questions here in the room while we're here? No? So,
Oh, I heard it well.
yes, I just need to repeat.
That means there is a question. Go for it.
Microphone when Isaiah will turn me on. What's the question?
It kind of goes back to what you were saying about the way you wanted, you didn't want too much repetition and to introduce something new and everything. And so there's a lot of debate going on right now about artificial intelligence kind of doing art instead of artists. And if you could respond to that a little bit, like how does that fit into that? Because I think AI would end up doing things repetitively, like just cutting and pasting, collaging already done things.
Yeah,
I was just going to repeat it real quick for the
Okay.
audience out
All right.
there. I'm going to paraphrase, but it has a question about AI and storytelling, and is it going to repeat itself?
Right. Yeah, I think there's so many different ways that it can be used, and it's so interesting because I spent a few years delving into AI at Disney Research and Development, and we never used it for any of those purposes. Right now, people see it as solely that, like ChatGPT, like cheat on an essay, or like copy other people's art. That's what AI is, and it's like we did years and never stepped into either of those zones. We were using it to make individual characters come alive with the ability to converse with you and stay in their own lane. So instead of like copying a speech that was given by somebody at a university and pulling from any other thing, we said, well, Winnie the Pooh, if you're creating a conversational Winnie the Pooh companion, has to stay true to its worldview, its personality, its knowledge base. And so you're doing a lot of authoring. You're not just saying, hey, go copy a bunch of people. You're going, I'm going to build an archive for you to stay within and use AI to make something vividly improvisational in the moment, but around the parameters of its personality, in not just its sort of a type of character, but its individual eccentricities. And I even had AI exploration, which I'm still doing with some people, for instruction, where it's like an author I'm dealing with. There's a guy named Mike Torsha who's authors exercise and nutrition books and things like that and trains people. And he was an early asker of a digital double, to have an AI version of himself that he could deploy to train more people, which he does one-on-one. But he said it would be great to let them know, I'm not fooling them. It's like, this is my AI double. And it's going to train with you, and when there's something critical, I'll bring the real Mike in, and I'll deal with you personally. But for a lot of general training, it can stand in for me. So photoreal, his voice, it's like they're comfortable with it because it's him. And he right away said he didn't want what's going on now with AI. It's like, I don't want it searching everything that's been written about nutrition and generally pulling it in and doing it miscellaneous answers. I did the curating. I've written books. I want it only to pull from my books. So he was like, I'm the author, stay in my author's lane. And it's using AI to be improvisational in the moment. And remember, well, I'm talking to Eric now, and Eric 2 weeks ago had a problem with his knee, and so I remember that. And so I'm using AI to be very aggressively different from just a playback. I'm remembering and building an archive of shared experience and a rapport, and like, you like to joke with me a lot. It's like you're always poking at the fact that I'm artificial and I don't really have muscles, and you do. And so I learned to do jokes back with you. So there's a lot of rapport and things going on, but we're at it for years and never got into the sort of lane of plagiarism and stealing and deepfake fooling and everything. It was quite the opposite, saying, how can you build absolute trust into systems that use AI very ambitiously to connect with people in real-time ways, and ways that are unique to each customer, which people love that. They love customization, individualization. And if I got a Marvel character or somebody that I authored, I did a thing for the ships. I showed you a little piece of it where 700 people at a time can do a freehand sketch, and then it's scanned and put into the show later on in the same evening. So I could see somebody saying, well, I would like the character I drew and came alive in that experience. I want it to jump into my mobile, and I want it to now live here and talk to me, and I want it to have my voice as its base voice. Or I'll choose from a selector, and gee, I'd like it to be more shy. I'd like it to be more bold. I'd like it to be whatever. And to have you really put your fingerprints all over the thing. It's like you making your imaginary friend. And then you could I was also working on projected areas where you could then say, okay, I drew it, it was scanned, it's on my mobile, it's talking to me now. Now I go into a place that has big projection screens, and I go, zip, I pop it from there. It's like twice as tall as I am. And then I go, hey, let's play. And we go on slides, and we do projection fun play areas. So you could, if you had a really popular character you drew, you could sell for it to go out and do playtime with other people in a projected park space. So there's just so many ways it can be used for originality. And I know it's inevitable that people are going to use it now for a lot of copying. It's irresistible. And you look at some of those things, and it is pretty impressive. But you have to remember, it's in a much more immediate way doing the things where we as artists have always been influenced. I looked at Rockwell and tried to learn his way of drawing. I looked at Sargent and looked at Heinrich Clay, and I would practice those things, and then you're influenced by it. But when I'm trying to do Heinrich Clay, I have my capabilities there's a threshold where it's like I can draw like him to a certain degree, but I can't just directly copy. There's the Jerry version of Heinrich Clay. And there's also how I'm sketching that day. So it's kind of like if my sketching skills are really working that day, or I'm kind of having a bad drawing day. And then there's also my emotional state. It's like, am I drawing that thing while I'm feeling really confident and great, or am I purposely sort of writing a sad story, and I'm letting myself go into that sad space. And so while I'm drawing in the Heinrich Clay style, I'm trying to express more of that sadness or whatever. There's all these sort of human eccentric things that every one of us that tries to be influenced by people that inspire us keep filtering it through all these things that are just inherently in us. And it has to do with limitations and strengths and how we feel and our muscles and all that physical stuff, to just copy and paste. I mean, for years I've had fun doing Photoshop tricks where you just go, yeah, this is absolute plagiarism. Right now I'm not doing it to sell. I'm just doing it to do an impact for a pitch or something, or to do just a joke with my friends. But you're aware that if you're just doing a grab somebody else's literal thing, pixel perfect, and just put it in your space, yeah, it's stealing. It's not being influenced by and having it filtered through you. It is plagiarism. But there is a version of that that's also could be positive. One thing I did at R&D in the last couple of years of the 5-year stretch where I was there was worked with Disney and Microsoft training a voice for an AI character. And it was what Disney and Microsoft, well, and it was great. The people at Disney were really in my corner as far as what we were trying to prove. And it was, can you take text to speech? Because a lot of AI stuff drives that, even though as an animator, director, storyteller, I know that a great deal of what has to grow up for AI characters is physicality, body language, all the stuff they do when they're not talking. But still, a lot of stuff is driven by text to speech. So say, go in that lane, deal with that part of it, which is part of how a character expresses itself. And now try to make it expressive and character specific. The guidelines for training a character to do from text to speech were tens of thousands of hours of saying things in the most neutral way possible. And just, if you have any change of emotion in tempo, in pace, in pitch, it would confuse the system. And so the idea was be as homogeneous as possible for tens of thousands of hours. And our premise was to teach a system to be expressive and to have it be character specific and expressive. So it's that one character in different moods. So the feedback from Microsoft was, well, that would take hundreds of thousands of hours. That's just insane. So we're like, well, let's try. So I was glad the Disney research people were brave enough to go for it. So they had me be one of the people that auditioned to do the voice, and they liked the character voice I came up with. It was not my regular voice, but they said, well, during pitch meetings and stuff, we used to hearing you do all kind of voices. See, come up with something. So I did an audition tape. They liked it, and they said, okay, you're going to train this voice. So they put a nice microphone setup in my office, and so for a couple hours at the end of work days, I would segue into doing that. When the building got empty, everybody else went home, I'd sit in the dark and train this character. And I was being very flamboyantly expressive and going for when it was sarcastic and when it was sad or like fake sad to fool you or truly sad, and just having so much fun with it. And I would get sometimes things to read that were just exercises in sound. So it would be strange couplings of words and stuff, but I would always do it with these vivid attitudes. And that was funny. There would occasionally be email that would come back where Microsoft would be going, please ask Jerry to be a little less expressive when he's doing the thing. So then I would go, okay, I'll redo the neutral, but I would still be a little more too expressive, even in the neutral. I'm like, I got to do this. But then several months into it, what they found out was it would bore fruit much quicker than they thought, with a smaller archive than they thought, and it really started to work. And they actually sent me early on a recording of my character singing Pure Imagination. I never sang as the character, and I never said those words, but they were able to use it to have me sing that song. So they sent that to me. And they said, okay, it's working. Text-to-speech can now be emotive, it can be expressive, and they're confident now it can be character specific while it's doing that. So it opened up the door. And the future model of that being not plagiarism is if you go to somebody that's a great voice performer and you say, I would like to have you train not just your normal voice, and then any of the voices that you do to specialize for a character, I'm going to have you train so that I can have the character do that. And you know what? Instead of you accepting one job today, you can accept 50 jobs today, and I'm going to pay you. So it's like they're going to save money because all those people are paying a little less than actually having you drive to the place and book the thing. But you're taking way more jobs. So they're paying a little less, and you're taking a lot more work, and everybody's happy, and everybody has a living. So that's AI, and that's putting it in a really responsible usage case. And I think there's tons of that I see possible. And I know it's kind of sad right now to see things like the ChatGPT model and things that are truly impressive, like Midjourney and stuff like that. It's still, what they're tripping into is most common usage that people would run towards is plagiarism and cheats people and puts people out of work. And it's like, it doesn't have to be that. It can be truly brought into lanes of increasing productivity a lot. What if you were said in Midjourney is going to look at your photographs and look at your artwork and everything and say, you're going to get a little residual every time it uses it. Like, everybody it sucked up from that copied,
Oh, wow.
they all get a little residual. It's like, and you'd go like, okay, now that inspires me as an artist to do something it's never seen before.
Yeah.
And go, I'm going to do something you've never seen, because people are going to get a little bit bored having it all look sort of like film noir, like Danger Zone, that depressing Disneyland photographs. It's like they're going to want change. So you go, I'm going to draw new stuff, paint new stuff, and photograph new stuff that will now go into that Midjourney thing and empower it. And I'm going to get residuals for giving it a new space to go. So I just think it could all be twisted into a very responsible, productive thing that inspire people to keep doing what they're doing and everybody make a living. It's just sadly, when a tool that powerful is available, invariably there's a lot of people that are just going to abuse it. That's just human nature. There's always going to be some people that abuse it. It's like I was talking to Teen about, when we had the treasure of having people bring original drawings from way back and set them on our table and trust us. Our whole Rat's Nest group, we would never abuse that. We wouldn't dream of it. But later on, there were people that did steal, that just took stuff, and then they had to stop allowing people to study because there are people that abuse it. And with the AI stuff, I see a stampede toward that. And I used to have people on teams. I was talking about, for instance, with avatars, that microexpression is very important when you get into beautifully done avatars of us for communication going forward, where it's just the same way that we're used to being together now, if it's done that beautifully, so we could be anywhere in the world but feel like we're having this in-room experience. Micro-expression is super important. And there's things like pupil size, iris and pupil, and usually people only think of it changing size with light, and that in a dark place it gets big, and with the light it gets small. But it isn't restricted to just that. It goes with brain activity. And I had a biology teacher in high school that had us go through the embarrassing thing as teens to like sit face to face with each other, just like a couple feet apart. And then he said, you're going to study the changing size, and what I want you to do is talk about things and just watch your partner's eyes. And I want you to purposely talk about boring things, and then suddenly throw in something really provocative or something really distasteful or something really sexy or whatever. Just like, I want you to surprise people and watch their eyes. And sure enough, oh my God, it's like the light didn't change at all, but their pupil size would just, we get big and small and medium. And it's like, wow. So I was with a team and talking about, it's important when you have friends talking to each other, like if you're talking to your relative, your spouse, your friend, or somebody you're just getting to know, that you honestly project all those micro-expressions into the shared space, so that you keep us communicating with the honesty and transparency and truth that we have in this room, this actual room. But there's invariably would be somebody on the team that would go, yeah, the bigger pupils make it look like they're more interested, so I'm going to do this fake AI girl, and when you look at her, pupils are going to get big, and you're going to think she's interested. I'm like, okay, off the team. You're not here. They're using something powerful to cheat and to try to be like everything the ultimate pop-up ad and make money, and it just said, no, we're going to be honest about all this stuff and not change. And first of all, we're going to let people know when they're dealing with AI instead of real. They're like, flag that so you know. And then we're going to keep responses to real people as they are in real life and just project. So we erase the distance, but we don't filter anything. We don't put any artifice on top of it. But there's always people that are the abusers and have their own motives to do it and quickly go to that. And in AI, sadly, there's a stampede towards the abuse of it. And I think a lot of this hearing is about regulation. It's like for years I've been talking about that it needs regulation for many reasons. And I mentioned to you before that empathy, bigotry, and therapy are three giant areas that AI should deal with, that has to deal with.
It's a fascinating talk.
And that only can happen if you bring in institutions of learning and you get regulation and all that stuff. And it's just, entertainment companies should not be the arbiters of what that means. But they're the people putting it out in front of the public. So you go, okay, people totally unqualified to deal with any of those three areas are putting the characters out that will immediately participate in that. So it's like there's a train wreck that's going to happen. So I think the regulation, the getting together and understanding all of it is important. I see very few players that really think about the comprehensive meaning of it gathering in a place. It's usually much more simplistic. It's just like, it shouldn't exist or it should exist, and AI is all powerful. And you have to remember, AI is being trained by teams of people. And when it's taught that something is the norm or is acceptable, there's people telling it that. And if I got a group of people together that was training a system on how to be productive, it would be very different from some other team that's teaching people how to be productive. It might be saying, the number of keystrokes per minute is how you measure productivity. I'm going like, no, how fresh the story was is what measures productivity. So if they don't hit the keystrokes for 5 days, but they were taking walks in the woods and writing in their sketchbook, and then they came back and they spent 1 hour writing and it was beautiful, you go, that's productive. They're having people train it that would go, that's a terrible person, you should fire them. Their keystrokes only happened for 1 hour of 5 days. Fired, they were like goofing off. And it's like, so all these, I think it's just a false assumption that these things are training themselves or are neutral. And it's just, there's people always coaxing and nudging them into paths of like how to learn those things. And so who's training them for what purpose is hugely important, because they have no inherent intelligence on their own. They're learning patterns that people are coaxing them into or out of. So that's very long.
That's amazing. Very amazing. I'll say something off cuff, I'm sorry.
Okay.
That you had said something that resonated with me, that you thought that AI could help humanity and train them to be more empathetic and kinder.
Absolutely.
Space.
And
Since it's leaning away from that.
yeah, there's absolutely. There's at MIT, there was a study a few years ago, and from their labs, they had given a talk, and Cynthia Brazil, I think, was the name of the head researcher there, and she showed tangible work from their lab, and she said to the crowd of people, she said, I'm kind of apologize ahead of time for saying this because we pride ourselves in being sort of clinical, scientific, but she goes, the empathetic ally is emerging as super important in AI and robotics. That people feel, anytime there's a system available, they coax it towards interactivity. Any system that's available of interactivity gets much more engagement from people, and anything that becomes an empathetic ally is super elevated in how used it is by people. And she showed a test case with a little girl and a little soft covered robot character that could talk to her, and they were both trying to solve puzzles that were put in front of them. And she said they found that having the robot admit mistakes and ask for help was really got the person to participate and be empathetic towards it and truly help it. And it was helping to train the real system. If it's like, you know how they say, well, prove you're not a robot, like look at all these pictures, which one is a bus? Well, if it's doing that and makes a mistake, and the little girl goes, goes, and so it's like, I'm sorry, I got that wrong. Maybe I could use some help. Can you help me? What do you think? And so when she would correct it, it wasn't just an exercise. It actually was training the system to be better at what it did, and it would express appreciation for that. So then they said when we're looking for problem solving, if she could solve it, fine. If not, she would also admit to the robot, I made a mistake, can you help me? And so they said that sort of very open, sharing, collaborative thing was a pattern that became super powerful. And they also showed that when they put that kind of empathetic ally bot presence into space like a rest home with elderly, that they said people had theorized, well, that will make people super isolated. They'll just be alone with their bot. And they said it was the opposite. It made people much more collectively social and talkative, because their instinct was like, look, did you see what the bot just said to me? And they're like, come over here, and like, what? And then talk to it, and then it would talk back to them, and they all laugh and they have fun, and it could engage them in group activities and stuff. So they said it got people that were sort of loners to connect and to be together. And I know when I was working on Toaster and a lot of other projects I've worked on, as authors, we're giving messages to people, and we've never hidden it. We're trying to teach people, like in Toaster, there's conflict, but then there's learning to get along and making peace and realizing that working together, it pays off. And by the way, realizing that you're doing this all to be reconnected with someone you love and you care about, and you hope they care about you, and to have like the air conditioner explode from angst over never being able to have, the kid was too short to even reach his dials, and he felt separate. And then at the end he's repaired and he like cries little Freon tears. And it's like, I was overtly talking about overcoming conflict and having empathy and helping each other and becoming a family instead of a dysfunctional group, to become a family. Even if you're not flesh and blood, you're all different. And so as you build an AI system as an author, I'd obviously be doing the same thing. I wouldn't want a character that says, oh, I accept any opinion that comes in. If you want to be hateful today, that's fine, I'll participate. But it's like, no, I would, in the same way that in a film, I'm coaxing you towards positive outcomes, I would author a character that's coaxing you towards positive outcomes in the most fun way. And that's not subversive. It's how all of us that put our stuff out in our art, our writings, our presence, the way we dress and talk to each other, we're always putting out a message. And it's like it's a lie to say that neutrality even exists. People that are making these things are not neutral. They're taking a position, and they're either knowingly making an incubator for things that are horrible, or they're knowingly making it resistant to that, and to have a sort of a positive experience in story space. Be much more like you can depend on that happening, and you don't feel fear about being pulled into something that's untoward. So having that sort of trust that the same positive efforts I'd put into authoring a story and authoring characters that are playing back for you, I would look for the same impulses to be on those characters if they're having real-time interactions with you. I would want Toaster, an AI Toaster, to be just as empathetic and understanding and patient with you as it was in the movie. I wouldn't want it to become suddenly a neutral character. It's like, no, I want to continue to be Toaster. Mm-hmm. And Deanna's warmth to be in it constantly. And so I just think that thinking it has its own intelligence and it belongs in a neutral spot is wrong. It's we are training it to have attitudes and express things. And a great pride of authorship, of the same way that we bring a character to life, the illusion of life, with drawings or with motion capture, we can take pride in authoring an AI character that does the illusion of life. It doesn't do it on its own. We devoted teams make the magic happen. But then to say it can now go out and improvise, that's part of my pride in it, is our efforts let it improvise with all of you. You can all take a character away today into different experiences, and somebody can take it on a plane ride and it's looking out the window for the first time, and somebody else is taking it to the zoo and it's like never seen a zebra. So you can have all these individual experiences with it, but to have it be true to itself and always be that character that you loved is, I think that's something that we can take pride in as authors, that you don't give authorship up as soon as it's AI. It's like it has no authors. It's like, no, it still absolutely has authors.
An artist told me this once. He still is like a father figure to me. He's a musician. He was saying that artists, like what we do is we're helping society evolve. We're helping humans evolve.
Mm-hmm.
We've evolved to a point where we got cars, we got this, we're doing all these things, but now it's the art that's helping us, evolve beyond. And what it sounds like with artificial intelligence and what you're saying, these authors, these artists are still doing that when it comes to evolution and designing, artificial intelligence and where that all comes from. And so it's interesting hearing you say that.
It feels, it's sort of getting exponentially more dynamic all the time, but it reminds me of that point of tension with Tron, on the first Tron, that there were so many people that thought that computers were the enemy, that they would never do art. There was the Academy that gave us no recognition for that whole film, even though it was hugely pioneering, because they thought, and Richard Taylor checked with them, they thought we pushed a button and the computer made the film. It was so handcrafted. Every frame was handcrafted. There was no animation tool in it. I couldn't say, start the light cycle here and take it here and interpolate frames. It didn't even know what that was. It said, I can give you one frame of the light cycle. Where do you want it in the next frame? And I would have to go, oh, I want it now over here. Oh, what's the address? It's this, and you have to do all the math. Okay, that's 2 frames, now where? It's like, this was like one frame at a time craft to make it happen. Their false assumption was we pushed a button and it automatically made itself. It's like the computer made the show. And there were also people that thought computers would lead to negative things. It's like the military takeover. It's like how from this computer in
How?
What's the film? Yeah.
The 2001 Odyssey.
Yeah.
2001. Lisberger, quite brilliantly, was talking about taking the computer at the time when people didn't trust it and thought it was going to be destined for that. It's like computers are evil. Computer is military. It's missile launching. It's AI taking over. It's inherently bad. And he went, well, what if we take a group of artists and have them right now, while computers are being born, they've been early stages, but now they're going to kind of grow a lot. It's like in a stage where it looks like computers are going to really start turning into things. What if I had a group of artists make a movie about being in a computer, and while they're making the film, use computers, like push computers technology into a direction that they want, like artists to start to make it their brush. So as they're making a movie about the computer, they are defining where the computers will go in the future while they're making this movie.
Wow.
So it was like proactively have them become the changers of the tool. And I do think in many ways, so I took it, Bill took it, some Lassiter, and so many people directly took some of the things we discovered in that, where we didn't just say, yep, that's what a computer is, stay away. We went, no, hey computer, come over here. I'm an artist. Like try to follow my gestures, try to follow my story, come here with me. And have it start to be able to do that, I think did have a big ripple effect out into the world. And so having authors confront the tool and coax it into a better place happened then, and had a big ripple effect. And I think that will happen now, where there's that point of tension too. It's like AI, oh, is it this bad thing? And I think there's a lot of opportunity for train wrecks and a lot of bad outcomes in between now and then. But I think ultimately people are going to realize that authoring, coaxing it into a lot of very good places, it could be hugely helpful. And yeah, for medicine and education and communication and companionship and all kinds of things, it could be a giant improvement to the world. Yeah.
We have a question on YouTube, you saying? Two questions
we
on
have
YouTube?
Two questions.
Mm.
They're not related to this. I just want to say, I'm
That's
sorry,
okay.
I can't do that, Dave. Or, that's what Hal said. when he
Yes,
just
yes.
Open the pod bay doors, Hal. I'm sorry, I can't do that.
Yes.
This lovely voice. Yeah. To go back to you working in a big studio, there is a question about how closely are you in contact with the writing department on the projects that you've worked on in these big, they call it a corporate animation machine.
Actually, the kind of nice thing is I haven't really had to deal with that. I mean, when I was doing something like, when I was dealing with The Fox and the Hound and Pete's Dragon, things like that, of course I was completely separate. It was just, it had already happened, and I was just a maker of a portion of the thing that had already happened. I did try to, on Fox and the Hound, did another proposed opening sequence where I took a shot at writing authorship of a part of the story that ultimately,
I loved that sequence.
it was a beautiful sequence, but it ultimately had too much emotional power that it got the same rejection that Frank and Ollie's scene did. Thankfully, the things that I fell into were more like the mega studio, sort of minutely like reaches in and manipulates a project and has committees that all co-write things together and might have a writing department. I mean, there's some wonderful writers there too, but there is a tendency to have committee-itis. And then to have something not work out of that. And then they would call me and go, what would you do instead? So at that point, like with Back to Neverland, that was a case where they had a boutique team that were all very sincere, but they felt like after close to 10 months of work and 2 different versions of what the film could be, that the writing that had happened, like the people controlling all of that, it hadn't borne the fruit they were hoping for. And they asked me to come in first to just be a fresh eye and see what I thought. So I did, and I told them my opinion. And before I knew it, they had shoved me into the director's chair. So now I wasn't dealing with any department. I was the writer and the director. And that happened with in an intense way, a quick way, like when Katzenberg calls and goes, I'm sending you this tape. What's wrong with it? What would you do instead? Great, write it and go shoot it Friday. It's like suddenly I was the writing department and the director. So, and did storyboards as well. And again, that began to happen with Cranium Command. They said, we're firing everybody at Colossal Pictures. We want you to look at it. It's like we really are uncomfortable with it, but we can't put our finger on why. And so, when I came in with the what to do instead, it was suddenly like the big committee that had been surrounding the previous people that were fired was gone, and they were just like, I got on a conference call with, it was Michael and Jeffrey and Tom Fitzgerald and Marty Sklar and I think Roy Disney, and just said, here's what I'm thinking, and they're like, do it. So then it became, who's your team? Like, you got to build this lean, mean boutique team. So I got to pick people and just go for the prize. So it was just a blessing to either write or co-write with the permission that they were going to give us creative freedom, because the previous version where people were told exactly what to do hadn't worked. So now they were letting the creative authorship happen. So there was more elbow room for that. And even though there was less time and money, there was much more creative freedom to push for the finish line. So I still had the resources and the giant studio around me, but I was working like an independent entity within that. One example of that too, that was just kind of very tangible and funny, was the Michael and Mickey was a short, or Michael Eisner at the opening of the Disney MGM studio. You would go on this whole tour, and I already had done several other shows along the way. And I had done Back to Neverland, which would play in the park. But you would come to this theater of coming attractions, and at Disney MGM Studios, they show you all these different aspects of how films are made. Here's how stunts are made. Here's how visual effects are made. Here's this and that and that. And then at the end, you get in a theater, and like, it all amounts to this. Here's the here's why we do all of that is to make movies, and here's trailers of coming attractions. Well, the person that was supposed to host that was Michael Eisner, and Mickey and the different characters were supposed to meet him, and Robert Zemeckis was fresh off Roger Rabbit, and that was his baby. He suddenly couldn't do it. He had gotten dreadfully ill. I felt really sad for him. And something had come up with his schedule. So the health thing plus the schedule thing just bumped him out of the picture. And so they came to me and said, well, you have to drive this now. And it was just a concept. There was no script for it. So, Jeffrey tells me, it's simple. You just come to the studio and we're just showing people the studio. So you can have Michael Eisner in his office. And I said, well, I really think it has to be fantasy. And remember with Walt, they always showed Walt in like a set for his office, and it was like your fantasy of what Disney was. He wasn't literally showing him what Disney was, and he's like, no, you don't get it. I'll just give you a tour of what this is. So come on over. So I go over, and he personally takes me through like sets and pictures of the whole studio. You've got this and this and this and this, and this is how we make movies. And I said yes, and that still takes me back to even more. So now I've spent my whole day having you promise me we make magic. And here's a picture. We make magic. We make even more magic. And when we put all this magic together, what is it? And I said, are you going to want to see like a normal hallway and a normal Disney? I think you've now raised the bar where they're going to expect to walk into the magic, the birthplace of magic.
Right.
I said, you're going to want to show them their fantasy of what Disney Studios is, just like Walt used to do.
Yeah.
And he's like, oh, okay. So he gave in. So on Michael and Mickey, there's beautiful Art Deco. There's 14-foot hallways with vaulted, recessed lighting and chandeliers. All that I got to build.
Wow.
Because of the storytelling that was needed. And so I had a giant studio around me, but I got to go in as the kind of, with a strong point of view as an individual filmmaker and make my case to the top guy and have it work. And then, ironically, for that 2.5-minute film, I had the same budget for all of Toaster. so
Wow.
that's part of what it meant to be in a giant
big.
studio.
Wow.
Yeah.
But anyway, I was glad not to be. I rarely had just sort of a writing department and me relating to the writing department. It was usually. And I've worked a number of times with Steve Spiegel, who's a great writer there, who's again and again works. But I always feel such a strong collaboration with him. He's such a strong writer to begin with. And then he's super open to collaboration when you come in and you're tailoring a story to be a specific thing. And something like Cinemagique, there were a lot of times where, and Cinemagique was a film where I had to take you through 60 different movies. So the Star Wars segment that you saw was one of them. And so we created all these different spaces, and my goal was to make the characters, our new characters we were taking, like invading all of these movies and make it feel like they were really there. So that often wouldn't happen with writing. It would happen with me sitting down with all these movies and go, I'm going to like fast forward through Titanic and look for an opportunity. And then I saw the thing where it's like he's handcuffed, and he's like, hello, help. And I went, wait. We could have Martin Short could hear him calling for help. He could come running down in the hallway. So then it was just like watching a film, getting an idea, and then I would just do a rough sketch, and then I give it to this wonderful storyboard artist who would do like prettier sketches. But I'd start it by going, now here's the sequence. So I cut them together, and I would just do a temp voice and go, here's the sequence in Titanic where he happens to hear him down below and goes to help him out. And then Steve would look at that and go, okay, that's a scene, and then he would post-write it. So sometimes he was inventing stuff, sometimes he was following, as I discovered stuff on film, then he would write around that. So I've been blessed to work with writers that were super open to what it means to Imagineer together instead of just writing a script that goes off to some other department.
Nice. Yes, I do have something from someone that wrote to you back in 2018, Michael. And
2018, wow. Michael.
Yes.
Okay.
So here it is. Dear Jerry, I'm quite a fan of your work and how you've pulled it all together. Anyways, I have some questions regarding the late attraction, Alien Encounter. Do you feel that the attraction might have done better if Michael Eisner's original plan for a tie-in with the Alien franchise and utilizing the xenomorphs and the Weyland-Yutani Corporation had been followed through? If that had happened, do you feel that Lucasfilm would have gotten a license to do it and still hired you for the job? As George Lucas was developing the Indiana Jones ride, Temple of Forbidden Eye, and juggling between that and work on the Star Wars special editions, what was the extent of his involvement with Alien Encounters?
Working backwards, I had collaborated with George a number of times prior to that, but there was no collaboration, so I never saw or heard George's involvement whatsoever when I worked on Alien Encounter. So that was there was nothing going on there. As far as the aliens, I didn't know that Eisner had a plan to tie it in with aliens.
Interesting. Yeah, I didn't know either.
That's intriguing to me. No, when I came in, it was purely just it was these fictional characters. I helped name them. So Dr. Femus and Spinlock. I came up late at night when I was just going. I saw like a bicycle lock, and I went, "Oh, you spin the bicycle lock. I'll call him Spinlock." Stuff like that. So I just charged ahead with the, the world that had already been developed for quite some time with those characters, Clinch and et cetera, and the planet XS. And I was not aware that they had toyed with Alien. Although it doesn't surprise me, because when I was collaborating with Eisner and directly on the set during Michael and Mickey, a couple things you should know. He was really nice to work with. I wound up directing him several times, and he would joke that, "Oh, it's my director showed up." But he, at the beginning, had said, I'm stiff as a board. I'm going to show you a video of something shot at me. I hate it. Like, tell me what they did wrong. So I gave him some notes about how I would work with him instead of that, and he liked the notes and thought that I had been correct about the problems on the previous one. And he just completely he just said, "I'll do anything you need." And he came and he was not distracted. He had his people stay away and not try to come give messages to him during the day. We had to shoot over 30 takes of something and then come back because of a focus problem and shoot again. And he never complained, and he just stayed focused, and he felt like, Jerry's going to help me and his team is going to help me to look as good as possible, and I want to just be present. So he was super nice to work with. He was super nice to the extras. They came up and told me. He came over and talked to us, and he was so nice. And then he also would just have great ideas. He came up with a whole scenario of a series about extras. And I know since then there's been one, but he said, there should be a show called Extra Effort, and it's about these extras, because I had introduced him to, there was a guy, it was the sweetest thing. He played a carrot in my show. He had to wear a stupid carrot costume. So we didn't even see his face, but he drove for like 3 hours to get to our set, and he had shown me pictures from a film he had been in where he had like 2 lines to say, but here he was like wearing a carrot costume for me. And so anyway, Eisner was like, had overheard us talking about that, and he had gone and talked to them, and he came back and he did this whole thing. Yeah, it's this girl, and she's going to this university, and she's trying to get out there and do something, but in the meantime she becomes an extra, and this and that, and they're like, that's good. That's really good. So it doesn't surprise me that he might have had a brilliant idea how to tie Alien into it.
Well, Alien is in the Great Movie Ride. Or that they took that away, but in MGM Studio, they even have a xenomorph that goes over you. I don't know the timing of any of that.
But I don't know, but it's
right.
Could be. And I do think also that if it had opened at Disney MGM Studios instead of in the Magic Kingdom, I think it would still be playing.
Yes.
It had the kind of following, like Tower of Terror had a following. I think Guardians is going to have a following in the future, the Mission Breakout. And if it had been in a park where scary things are part of the fun, I think it would still be there. But it was, unfortunately, it was a makeover of an existing place, and it was kind of super convenient for that. But it wound up being the one scary thing with an age warning in that park, and I think that's the only reason it had to be changed to to stitch, which I've never seen, but
Right. Right. Yeah, the Stitch ride, I was like, I never got to experience Alien Encounter because I'm too young, and I'm so like upset over that. I wish I got to experience Alien Encounter, but me being a fan of Lilo and Stitch, like I loved the Stitch ride,
Yeah,
and
cool.
I don't like telling you that.
we had, People's Home Videos are still out there, and there's a guy named Caleb who's built a scale model of it. And he was also too young to go on it, but he's just studied every home video, and he has made a scale model of it, and it's damn good.
That's awesome.
And he's like, he asked me for any sound I had, and he's like put it together, and he's
that's so sick.
he's replicating shots of like the the night vision camera that the guy that gets eaten and stuff.
Wow.
And he did his own thing and built his own lid for the guy to open the point of view. So yeah, there's some people that never wrote it that are replicating it just because they watched it. And it's funny, you look back at those home videos, and it's like crappy home videos back then, like terrible resolution and everything, but it's delightful to hear like entire rooms of people just screaming and laughing and doing. It sounds like you're on a roller coaster. Nothing moves. You're in a stationary room locked into a seat with restraints around you, and people are screaming like they're at the top of a roller coaster. And Rick Rothschild, who produced with me in that final phase where we got the show really tailored the way I wanted it, both of us got feedback from the park that they were being approached by people who really liked it, and it was invariably senior citizens that would come up and say how much they enjoyed it. And so we were scratching our heads like, why would something that's so adrenaline pumped and scary with an age warning on it be appealing to the elderly? And the only thing we could figure was it was the adrenaline pump of being on a roller coaster, but we did not give you whiplash. We sat you completely still and made sure you stayed still with a seat restraint, except for a test screening where one person disappeared in the dark. So somebody got out and crawled out of the space, and the lights came up and there was just an empty seat. So either that or it was
That's
eaten.
scary.
It might have been eaten by the alien, or they got away. But there was one. Other than that, no one has gotten out.
Jerry, you have like 3 questions in your backlog about this specifically, so I'm gonna ask about it now.
These are from the letters.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes, the letters, yeah. The letters. So the original aspect ratio of Brave Little Toaster. Multiple people are asking about that. What was the original aspect ratio, and then what's the story behind why there's 2 different ones?
My original plan, all of us making it, was that it would first go out in theaters. And so 185 at the time was traditional theater screen. So 185 was what I wanted to compose to. But I also knew that Disney Home Video had bought the rights, and nobody was doing letterboxing in those days. You would just see a square picture. So I did not want them to cut into my 185 thing and give you a tiny view in the center of my 185. So I went, well, the only way to protect my film is to build up and down from the 185 to give you a full square screen, right?
Yes.
Otherwise, because I hate when they take a 185
No, that's
and then
horrible.
squeeze.
It's
like,
evil. That's evil.
and when it's widescreen,
It's
it's even
evil.
worse. So I went, okay, protect ourselves, do 185, and then increase the height of it to get the full square in for 4:3 video release.
Mm-hmm.
As we were doing that, I really had to work, and Brian McEntee wound up being great with this. But at the beginning, I didn't trust that we were being dynamic enough with the 185 because of what we had in the 4:3 bigger square picture. You know, we'd do that, and I would go back to the original boards where it was just like strong perspective and go, did we really capture that in this? I'm looking at higher and lower than I did in the original board. And we had our field guides at the time. It was a piece of plastic with the printed outline of all the different sizes. And you would put it up and it would have all of them printed, and you'd kind of lay it down together and eyeball it. And it's like, yeah, I think we have it. So I went, okay, don't trust it. I don't trust any of our minds to look through the plastic at all the sizes and make a judgment call. So what I want you to do is take black card and cut out only 185, so I can't see anything beyond it. And then cut the 4:3 and also black card. and we're going to take every shot and lay one down and make sure it's the best it can be, and then lay the other one down and be the best. And boy, did we find out that we had been weak before doing that. So once we did that and instituted, invariably what would happen is you'd put that mask on for the 185 and be like, no, I don't feel the dynamic perspective. We got to really push the wide angle thing a lot more, like, you know, when they see Blanky freezes and they go, it's the blanket, you know, and there's a low angle version of Toaster pointing. It's like we really, once it, you know, in the 4-3, it felt like it was all there. As soon as you went to 185, you didn't see that perspective. So you had to shrink it down and then really pull it back to make it dynamic. Once you did that, and you'd go, okay, now I've got it in the 185. I feel it. Now you take that off and extend it out into the square, into the 4-3, and then you'd still feel it there too. It would, but we'd sort of have that be the birthplace. Is go to the blackout 185 forced view, make it work there, and then expand it out to do the 4-3. You know, I had no control over how things went out. We never had a full-fledged theatrical release. We did have some prints made that were shown in a theater at the 185 aspect ratio. I think the Wadsworth Theater screening way back was that. And I recently, you know, this is totally kind of renegade, and I have no judgment about it legally, but just as far as archiving and people treasuring things, I really appreciated that in the last year, I had a group get in touch with me where it was just fans, and they had found somebody who had purchased a film print of the Brave Little Toaster that was in good condition. They sent me frame scans, high resolution frame scans, and it looked good. And it might have been like one of those early festival screenings that Tumulite had a few prints made that were Wetgate 185 prints that looked good, which means it doesn't have the silly wobble and stuff that the video transfer had. And they were going about high resolution scanning and then color correcting. So I took some of the cells that I have. I have a collection of a number of them. I don't have, it's not vast, but I have a few. And I would put a color chart next to it and take shots so they could calibrate. And so somewhere there are just fans, not to make money and not to sell things, in fact, probably spending a lot of their own money, are doing a careful restoration of the film that I think should eventually, you know, AFI should be able to see like a 185 beautiful print of Toaster when they're done with that. So, you know, I have no control over the legal aspects, but I appreciate what they're doing.
Yeah, I would love a Criterion Disney collab for Brave Little Toaster.
Yeah, yeah, that'd be cool.
I would adore that. Do we have a question from the audience?
They even put, by the way, when the DVD came out, they even put on our film making of interviews with people on the other two films, which I've never seen. So
oh my God.
They even will get the false impression that they might have had something to do with our film. They had nothing to do with it.
No, that must be. Did you see that? Like
I haven't
bonus
watched
feature?
it, but it was on a post feature where it was like the making. But it was interviewing with Hyperion's next two Toaster films as if it was the same thing, which it was not. So,
I was gonna ask if there's anyone in the audience that wants to ask something.
Any questions from you guys about anything Jerry has talked about or any of the films he's worked on?
We have one here.
Okay, yeah.
I don't see any hands then. So there is a question from our YouTube group, and they were wanting to know if you could talk a little bit about the Betty Boop movie production, a little bit about the history of that. This is an unknown area for me. I'm like, Betty Boop. Jerry, did you work on that?
Betty Boop almost happened, yeah. Richard and Lily Zanuck and Alan Ladd Jr. So Richard and Lily Zanuck as producer and Alan Ladd as the head of MGM at the time. We're trying to make a Betty Boop feature. It was originally going to be in live action, and they were thinking of Madonna being the Betty Boop character. But then there was a lot of people scratching their heads and going, it's weird because, I mean, the trademark of Betty Boop is the gigantic head, and if you do that in live action, it'll just be creep show. And it's like, I really think drawing is the way to go with that character, you know? Even realistic CG would be hard to stomach. So anyway, I was given the opportunity. Steve Leva and I were knocking around. He was advocated for a lot of stuff and sort of acted as a agent and producer type that would sometimes get us into to doors. And so he said, well, why don't we go talk to the Xanax and just maybe be considered as, like, maybe animation is an alternative for them to do it in, because it's kind of floundering now. So we went in and talked, and I proposed a whole storyline for Betty Boop that would replace the script. I read their script and went, I think it'd be great to do something that was really, I took it through history where vaudeville was being left behind and films was starting to happen, and her father was a vaudevillian, and he's seeing his career disintegrate while her starts to rise, and her feeling bad for her dad, but him wanting the best for her. And
That's nice.
And had a romantic interest, and like her falling in love with a young guy in that industry too. And so anyway, they liked it, and I wrote a treatment. And Richard and Lily Zanuck and Alan Ladd Jr. just went, we like it, this is the story now. And so we want you to write the script. And Alan Ladd Jr. gave me this offer because Steve Leva had written a project story of his own called Feathers, and it was about a guy who does cards, like greeting cards, and they start talking to him as he's going into psychological problems, and it becomes a whole fun thing about him seeing all his characters out in the world when nobody else does and they think he's crazy. So that would be a live action animation combination thing. So they said, how about you write and produce Betty Boop, and then we'll get you writing the screenplay for that. That was a treatment. So I would write the Feathers screenplay and direct that. And as I get my live action done for that, then as the Betty Boop crew finishes off the film, I bring them on to complete the combination animation to fit in with the live action. So they're both under Alan Ladd in his studio. So they're both MGM films. They come out in the same calendar year. And I would have been writer-producer on Betty Boop and writer-director on, co-writer and director on Feathers. So really a good calendar year.
I wish I got to see these.
I wrote the screenplay, and they immediately accepted it. And in fact, Richard Zanuck said it was their quickest path from idea to treatment to finished screenplay that they'd ever had. So we were all completely in complete sync with that. I brought in Steve Moore to direct, who's delightful.
Nice.
And so, and I told Steve, please forgive me, I'm going to really backseat drive like I normally wouldn't until we get a story reel together. Once the story reel's together, I'll really get out of your hair and let you truly direct on your own as I go do Feathers. A whole studio came together. We had Benny Wallace was our music director, composer, and he brought in, he's an amazing saxophone player and composer. And he brought in some just first-rate people from the music industry, from that classic era that were still around, and did temp tracks for us and everything. So we put a whole studio together. We got 75% storyboarded, and we're 2 weeks from recording.
Wow.
With Bernadette Peters as Betty, with Harry Connick Jr. as her love interest, with Robert Morse as her dad. And Alan Ladd Jr. got fired as studio chief. So on one day, we lost all of Betty Boop and all of Feathers, and the whole studio had to disband. And so it was a heartbreaker. There were a lot of tears. And then, ironically, and I have a PowerPoint that is, it's called Almosts, and it's a bunch of things where they suddenly went poof, where it's like, and you go, there's no more sure thing than, like, I personally have, with no in between, it's just, I personally have been dealing directly with Richard and Lily Zanuck and Alan Ladd Jr. They're like the producers and run the studio. Mm-hmm. And they want me and have me under contract, and we have a studio, we're making it. Like, it's a sure thing.
I hear these stories.
It's just gone.
It breaks my heart just hearing it.
Have you been doing anything? You go, yes. But their perception is just like, well, you've been hanging out for 2 years. It's like, no, I was really busy.
I want to ask, did you lose too many films? Did you lose too much like work where it affected you when you finally got to, you know, make something and to the end where you have like an extra oomph? Like you have this film that you're working on, Strawmen, right? All these great films that almost happened and just went away. What do you carry with you after all those experiences when you make something new like this?
It's kind of crazy. It's you have to always have hope, and several reactions. One is that I have also found that some things have come back. For example, the show on the ships, the animation magic show. I had spent over 12 years trying to get that technology, that trick, that magic moment of you do a drawing and it comes alive to happen. My initial push was with probably an HBO show that was going to be very racy, and it was graffiti in a bathroom stall at a bar. So you'd have social satire. It was like HBO thing where you'd have people meet and they're going on dates and you bring up subjects. Somebody goes to take a leak. They draw on the wall with their Sharpie. When they leave, their voice, it comes alive. And everybody else who's drawn on the wall, it's like everybody talks and you take it over the top like South Park and Simpsons and stuff, of South Park more overtly. But now their character that they drew plays out the same things they're discussing at the table, but in a more crazy way. And I have Bob Camp, co-writer of Ren and Stimpy, working with me on it.
That's sick.
And so we took it to HBO and they went, oh my God, it's too racy and crazy. It's, well, my agent at the time said it's gonna ruin your reputation because it's so adult. And then I went to MTV and they said, oh my God, it's too smart for our audience because it's social satire. They said it's too intellectual for them. So I said, well, I can dumb it down. I promise you. Like on the bathroom wall with graffiti, I promise I can dumb it down. They're like, yeah, but I know what you're up to. You're doing social satire. That's above their heads. So then I had the Alan Blomquist, who's a wonderful producer on Chocolat and What's Eating Gilbert Grape. He started representing the blue collar comedy guys, and he went, oh, maybe they could take it into a space. And then I had another comic came along who happened to be an artist himself as well as doing stand-up, and it's like, well, maybe it's at my club where I'm doing my stand-up, and I really do have a sketchbook, and it could be me. So, but it was like 10 years, 12 years, where it kept not quite happening. And there were all these different reasons why it didn't happen. And then, so I had people saying like, why are you still hanging on to it? And I was still doing like occasionally another test, another piece of graffiti. But I did have this thing about the characters, even though they were made, like I had one episode I had written a short story for where this guy comes in and is drunk and he uses a Sharpie and draws, and he's out of the room before the character comes alive. And then the character's pining because it doesn't know who its dad is. Oh. And so the whole thing, it's going through angst over, I don't know who my father is. And the other character's trying to console it. And it finally is feeling suicidal. And it goes on the mirror just because there's a guy that comes in that's cleaning things. And he gets in front of the spray and gets erased. And the other characters are crying. And he gets erased. And he's gone. And then you see the same drunk guy come wandering in, and he looks at the blank spot in the wall and goes, "Hey!" And he like redraws it. Oh. And then he walks, and it comes alive and watches him go out. And goes, "Dad." So it was like a sweet bathroom graffiti story. But anyway, I was still toying with things like that, and then I just got a call. Tom Fitzgerald, who's a wonderful creative guy at Imagineering, said, we're building ships and we're cutting steel and we don't know the magic moment in this space. And he goes, we never work that way. You know us, we've worked together for years. We always come up with the story and the magic moment and then we build it. Mm-hmm. And now it's the opposite. Like we haven't cracked that nut. We're building a space we know what it looks like, but we don't know what happens there. And it's like, so can you please come in and take a look? And I came in and they said, well, we have this, we have a space on the ship where they go into a restaurant, and it feels like they're in the animator's palette. And it's a cartoony version of being in an animator's workroom where you see desks and all that stuff, but it's really crazy black and white, pushed proportions and everything. But they said on this ship, we're going back to like when you started in the 70s working in the Disney feature animation department. There was that beautiful Art Deco furniture. He goes, we're going all the way back to that, and it's going to be classic. And so everything is like it's like you pushed back time and you're in like in the 1940s. You stepped into the Disney feature animation department, and there's layout desks and animation desks, and the whole restaurant is going to feel like it's that. So, but like, what is the magic moment? And I went, how about if your drawings come alive there? That's what we did. We'd sit at our desks and we'd do a drawing, and then it would, come alive. And he was like,
Wow.
yeah, that's
Yeah.
cool.
Yeah.
So I brought in a test that I'd done like more than a decade earlier. I didn't tell him how old it was. And I showed him and I did the exercise where I took one drawing. I didn't animate it. I went through the exercise to scan one drawing, break it into parts, manipulate it in After Effects was my tool at the time, and put warp and put motion blur and stuff like that, and say from one drawing all this animation, this character came alive from that. So they liked it, and then I did a version which I think I have on this computer, where I asked them to do drawings to give me, and I took the scene of Dick Van Dyke dancing with the penguins in Mary Poppins, and then this was not easy on a home computer, but I de-penguinized it. I took all the penguins out and left Dick Van Dyke dancing, and then I put their sketches in, dancing with him instead of the penguins, and then they were hooked and just said, that's it. So it now lives on 2 of the ships, and they're talking about expanding it onto other ships and everything, but it started out as a Secret Life of Graffiti, where drawings come alive. Now it's like everybody on the ship goes into an animator's room, and because they're in that source of creativity, their drawing comes alive. It's a different reason for the magic to happen, and it's a beautiful drawing on an animator's desk instead of a tag on a bathroom stall. But it was finally that core thing that I could have easily given up on. Suddenly having not just a life, but a need to exist years later. It's like they needed something, and I happened to, out of all my stuff, teaches you to keep your idea box chock full, I happened to have an answer. And to me, it was the gorgeous gift to both of us, because I finally got to see people make their own drawings come alive, which is what I wanted with this other show. By the way, on the other show, I wanted Dave Grohl to come along with his band, and I wanted him to do his drawing. It's like I didn't want to have an animator do his drawing. It's like you just go, you guys came over to perform in the bar, and you do a sketch. It's like I'm not going to tell you what to draw, but after you draw it, I'm going to make it come alive. And it was so fun to let that happen for people on the ship. And I was told by Joe Lancicero, I went to school with him. He was in that year 1 class, and he did giant projects like design Toontown for Disneyland.
Oh, wow.
And he told me on the ships that he would take people into that space, the animation magic, after we did that, had the drawings come alive. And that he had people that were afraid to draw, that were timid. And they'd go, oh, I can't do that. And he'd go, it's okay, just do anything. And they would do the simplest stick figure thing, and then when it would start to dance with Mickey Mouse on the screen, people would cheer, and they would feel so good. And they said they would use words like they felt empowered because their little stick figure got cheers from the crowd.
That's awesome.
So that's part of it, is you sometimes see things that you think might be gone forever come back. Other ones I still, like there was a Witch Girl, was a feature, Tamara Lucier Stocker, who I just saw at John Musker's I'm Hip screening. It's the first time we'd seen each other in a long time. It was originally her story, but she invited me along with other people to steer the story and become director as attached. I had a 25-minute, I still have it, 25-minute storytelling pitch. And another one for one called Party Animals, which was the producer that had done the Babe movies. I'd done another
Wow.
story development with them. So for those 2 features, I had pitches, and one was a 25-minute pitch, the other one was a 45-minute pitch. Between the 2 of them, I had to perform 17 voices while I was up doing the pitch. And they would fly in people from other countries, and we'd have story time. And there was another director and me, and I would start with the 25-minute pitch, then he would do his feature pitch, then I would do the 45-minute closer. And those films never got made, but it was wonderful working on the stories. And oddly enough, I have the joy of like being in the room telling a story, and like having people fall in love with the characters and go on the adventure with them and care about them and be happy at the end when they made it through, and talk about it afterwards. Then we would chat together and everything. So granted, that's not getting the film made, but those storytelling sessions stick with me as some satisfaction, you know? It's
Wow. So you're not getting too heartbroken.
At the beginning, it was really hard, and over time, I realized, Steve Levy, who I was talking about, who is also a playwright, he came up with this term, and it's a little hard knocks, but it's true. He said, remember, when you're going through all this, it's an all-volunteer army. Nobody told you had to be here.
Yeah.
It's like, that's true. That's true. We all do choose this. It's not like somebody foisted it on us. So, the stakes are there for that to happen. But, there is part of you that has to just remain optimistic, and even though you go through the heartbreak. And it was harder to take with the first several. And there was a whole another one. Well, I have a whole list of them, but another one's just easy to describe. Lisa Henson used to run Sony Columbia. She was the studio chief at Sony Columbia. She heard about a story that I went in and talked to people, and they said, "Oh, you have anything new you're working on?" "Yes." "What is it?" I gave them a description. They're like, "Have you shown this anywhere around town?" I went, "No, I just invented it like while I was telling stories to my kids at bedtime and like 2 weeks ago." And they're like, "Don't tell anybody." And they called my agent and said, "We're going to have you in front of Lisa Henson before the week's out." I did. She loved it, wanted it. It was like a big live action picture that would have used a lot of CG and puppetry when that was kind of a new thing, like in the sort of around the Stuart Little time. And it was going to be a big, big, expensive A-list picture. And I was under contract, and I was story, writer, director, under contract with the studio chief. She got fired. The last time I saw, well, not the very last time, but the last important time that I saw my film was it was on the front page of the calendar section with LA Times saying, now they have to figure out what to do with Lisa Henson's A pictures, like The Kiss by Jerry Rees.
Wow.
It's like, and what they did was put it in a drawer. And years later, I had an executive call me up and say, I was going through shelved projects to see if there was anything worth reclaiming, and I really got intrigued by this. And I read a script, and it was pretty good, and then I saw there was another earlier script, and I read that one. And then the best script was the first one, the one that you wrote, and like, maybe we could revive that. And then 9/11 happened, and everybody shut down their development, and everybody went into terrorism mode. So there's just been lots of films that's happened to. But I'll tell you, every time I get into either back with the same characters, imagining how it still might happen, or thinking up new characters, there's just something irresistible. To me, they have such a therapeutic quality, and just imagining them and writing them and painting them, where you go, they might happen, or a few people might enjoy part of it, or maybe it'll eventually completely grow up. But it's kind of irresistible to just keep trying.
So it's less about resilience-ness, if that's even a word. It's less about
like
you
that.
being resilient
Resilienceosity.
and more about your pure love for this, your pure love of storytelling. And
Yeah. I do think so, because if I thought of it as jobs, I wouldn't be as heartbroken. You're just, well, yeah, I lost a job, but I look for another job. It's like the only reason you feel heartbroken is because it's more than a job to you. It's actually, you care, and you care about the characters, you care about the emotions that are conveyed, you care about the impression an audience gets from it. You hope they take it with them. And because all of that is inherently like important to you, way beyond paycheck. It's like sometimes you work for a long time with very little pay or with no pay to try to coax them to life. The loss is heartbreaking because of that. If it was just a job, it wouldn't be. And then, over time, I think the reason you stick with it is because, and the reason you get beyond the heartbreak to have the joy reawakened is because it still is, the characters in the story and the emotions are still the important thing to you. So as you create more of that, it begins to buoy you up. You aren't going like, well, I lost job X, now I'm replacing it with job Y, and what is my pay? It's like, that's a different way to measure things. But if you're going, oh, I lost that character, it's like that character was meant to live in and now it's trapped. And you go like, maybe by making this character's gonna like maybe send a soul message to the other character.
Right.
Like, we see you, man. So yeah, I think caring and heart is the reason for heartbreak, but the reason for hope.
Gorgeous. All right, and we're done. Thank you so much.
Jerry, thank you.
Absolutely. I just, it's a joy to gather with you, and appreciate everyone who's stepped into the room, and all of you out there just had a great time. Alan, you're always a joy to talk to. You make it so easy.
No, you're a joy to talk to. Are you kidding me? I could go on forever. So.
Oh, we've got another 4 hours we could launch into.
Right. So thank you so much, everyone,
Part 3.
Yeah, I'm down. But till then, we're signing off.
Signing off. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much, Jerry. Amazing.